Chapter 935. Your Highness. Ren Baqin was leaning against the railing on the second floor and looking down at the hall when a man hurried over to greet him. Ren Baqin smiled. He had seen the other party when he first entered the door, and it was an old acquaintance, Zhang Changkong. He was the chief of the Golden Ring residence and Zhang Caixin's father. He was currently the vice-captain of the Yun Guards of the Rearguard Commandery. After a few years, Zhang Changkong seemed to be more energetic. He wondered if this old tree had bloomed again after being alone in the Yun nation for so long. Otherwise, why did it look so radiant? However, these things had nothing to do with him. Ren Baqin turned around and entered the room. Come in and talk. Xianjia was standing behind him just now. When she saw him enter the room, she immediately followed him in and stood in a corner without saying a word. Zhang Changkong carefully closed the door and acted as if he didn't see Xianjia. Why are you here, Your Highness? I heard that there was a man who looked like an aboriginal heading east from Liang City. I wanted to investigate when I had the time, but I didn't expect it to be Your Highness. Ren Baqin nodded slightly. He didn't tell the people of the Rearguard Commandery that he was coming. They had done a good job of noticing him when most of their energy was focused on that big case. After all, they had only been in the Yun nation for more than 3 years and didn't have enough manpower. It seemed like they were developing well locally. If Ren Baqin remembered correctly, there were about 10,000 strong men in the Yun nation scattered across more than 400 cities. On average, there were about 20 to 30 people in each city. The lowest position in the Rearguard Commandery was the Tiki, an internal staff member. This kind of strong man was an external staff member, equivalent to a lifelong contract worker, and was mainly responsible for being an informant. Has there been any movement in the Yun nation recently? How is your investigation going? Ren Baqin asked directly. Your Highness, ever since that incident, the number of Jianghu people on the streets began to decrease. After that incident, the idle Jianghu people on the streets could hardly be seen anymore. Only the martial artists from the gangs would occasionally appear. We originally built a relationship with some of the Yun nation's martial artists and even recruited a few of them as strong men. We got some information from them, but we haven't confirmed it yet, so we haven't reported it to Your Highness. Zhang Changkong said respectfully. Speak. Many martial artists living in remote places have left recently, and their whereabouts are unknown. Looking at their residences, there were no signs of a fight. They had all left on their own. Some of the experts from the sects have gone into seclusion, but the experts from the big sects are the same as usual. It seems like nothing has changed. What's the situation with the gangs in the Yun nation? Tell me more. Ren Baqin closed his eyes and listened to Zhang Changkong's voice. There are a total of 127 well-known sects and gangs in the Yun nation. Among them there are a total of 13 well-known sections. Among them there are 10 orthodox sects, 2 sects that are neither orthodox nor evil, and there is only one evil sect. These 13 sects were the strongest in terms of strength, status, and influence. They were called the upper 13 sects. In other words, the ones I mentioned just now that weren't affected. Apart from the 13 upper sects, there were 41 other sects with spirit wheel experts. Almost all of them only had one spirit wheel expert. These sects weren't weak either. Altogether they had close to 50,000 disciples. The rest were mainly gangs formed by earth wheel experts or sects that used to have spirit wheel experts but had declined. Their scope of operations was limited to one city, and there were even 2 or 3 gangs in the vicinity of a city. There were quite a lot of people in these gangs, but there weren't many experts. In particular, the power of these gangs was mostly in the marketplace. The people we roped in were from these gangs. They weren't as cohesive as the sections. Most of their experts were recruited from outside, so they were easier to rope in. How many sects aren't affected now? Ren Baqin asked after pondering for a while. As far as we know, there are a total of 34 sects that weren't affected. The chiefs of the other sects are either practicing in seclusion or traveling outside. Were the incidents that happened a few days ago done by these sects? According to our recent investigations, there were more or less experts in these sects whose whereabouts were unknown. As for the rest, we still need time to investigate. Ren Baqin opened his eyes, which were filled with coldness. In other words, these sects are all possible? Yes. However, we have calculated that there are only a few hundred experts whose whereabouts are unknown. It seems that they weren't able to quickly surround and kill the patrol team, and none of them escaped. If the top experts were to take action, they would be able to do it. Are there any abnormalities among the ordinary disciples of those sects? He knew that many things in this world couldn't be calculated according to common sense. A few hundred people couldn't seem to kill the patrol team, Wu Kai, Peng Yu, and Li Rui. However, there was a species in this world called the top experts. As long as 2 or 3 of the top experts on the list were involved, it would be enough. No, they have only shrunk their range of activities, and there are no signs of large-scale deployment. Continue to investigate and seize the time. If possible, find a breakthrough in those sections. As for the price, nothing is more important than their lives. In addition, seize the time to investigate the situation of the top experts in the Yin Nation, Ren Baqin said. Understood. Go. After Zhan Changkong left, the coldness in Ren Baqin's eyes gradually faded, and he frowned. If it was true that so many sects were involved, it would be difficult to deal with them. Even if some of the experts and ordinary disciples weren't involved, the Empress and all the court officials were furious. They didn't have the mood to determine whether these disciples deserved to die or not. As long as they were involved, they couldn't let any of them go. The Empress's order was to kill all the practitioners at the Earthwheel level, and the other order was to kill all the sections. The former referred to the idle martial artists of the Jianghu, while the other referred to the more than 100 sections. Had the experts of the Yin Nation gone mad? Did more than 100 sects have someone from each sect who dared to participate? Or was there some organization that had its tentacles in all the sects? If that was the case, this organization was really scary. What do you think? Ren Baqin asked without turning his head. They deserve to die. Xanji's cold voice sounded. Ren Baqin rubbed his eyebrows. Xanji knew his purpose for coming here, let alone the rest of the court and the Empress. He reckoned that even the Empress didn't have high hopes this time. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but that she wanted to kill them all. TSK. I'm doing this to save tens of thousands of lives. I'm really a saint. My wife wants to kill someone and I come to save them myself. Ren Baqin mocked himself. The door was pushed open and Li Yuanzhu walked in. She said to Ren Baqin calmly, "This is for the entire human race." The temperament of the aboriginals was like that. They were unreasonable. You are reasonable, far-sighted, and have great ambitions. That's why you're here. Ren Baqin pondered for a while, smiled at her and said, "I can still praise you a little more. I don't think I'm arrogant yet." Li Yuanzhu chuckled. "These are words from the bottom of my heart, Yuanzhu." Ren Baqin lamented, "Being praised by the third most powerful expert in the world makes me drunk even though I don't have any wine." Li Yuanzhu pursed her lips and smiled without saying a word. She was puzzled as to why Qi Zixiao would choose such a weak man as her husband. Ren Baqin wasn't even a man-wheel expert at the time and was just an ordinary person. Compared to Qi Zixiao, one was in the sky and the other was in the ground. That's right, he was underground, not above ground. However, from their recent interactions, Qi Zixiao had good foresight even though she wasn't good in other aspects. Although this person wasn't strong, he was indeed talented. However, he wasn't proficient in poetry and songs like those scholars. Instead, he was proficient in all aspects. In terms of the nation, Tianjin Basin was subdued by him, and the Jing tribe people now followed his lead. The current situation of the Yun nation was his plan. If it weren't for this incident, the Yun nation would have stabilized in just 2 years. He was the one who wanted to build the official road. Although he hadn't seen its use yet, anyone with a little knowledge would know how useful it was. It was said that Dayo's plan to build a new capital along the river was also planned by him. The shaved ice, glass, street lamps, soap, toothpaste, and even the well salt produced by Dayo during the war were all made by him. As the principal of an academy, he established the first academy in Dayo and nurtured a group of students with practical abilities. He opened bookstores, published newspapers, and enlightened the people. The organization of the Yun nation also relied on him to build the framework. He was also the one who took out the so-called nuclear warheads. Now, he was running around for these Yun nation warriors. It could be said that he alone was equivalent to 1,000,000 soldiers. It had to be said that Qi Zixiao had picked up a treasure. Chapter 936. The people here are so skinny. Lin Xiaola sat on the edge of the bed and muttered as she looked at the people below. They're just like the electric poles in Lan City. Not only was he thin, but he also had a hunched waist. When he walked on the side of the road, he lowered his head and walked quickly. They are all ordinary people. Ren Baqin said faintly, "No matter what kind of society you live in, there will always be the poor and the rich. The rich will be rich, while the poor will find it difficult to find food and clothing. These people are still all right. Although their faces are a little malnourished, they still look healthy. If you have the money to eat vegetables, you might as well eat more meat." Lin Xiaola muttered and turned her head away. Ren Baqin, well said. If he had grown up in an environment like Dayo, he would probably say, "Why not eat minced meat?" Here, these words were not exclusive to those pampered young masters. The aboriginal commoners were extremely astonished and said, "He can actually afford to eat. I might as well buy some meat to eat." Just look at the people in the prison camp. No matter where they came from, they ate meat until they vomited, and their eyes lit up when they saw a wild vegetable. However, there were also many benefits. They ate meat every day until they vomited and worked hard every day, so their physiques were much stronger. Compared to the city guards of the Yun Nation, they looked more like elite soldiers. It had been 3 years. When he returned, he would have to give them paper vouchers as their salaries. On one hand, it was to give these prisoners of war something to look forward to and strive to keep a group of them as technicians after the end of the decade. On the other hand, it was also to prepare for the currency reform. After all, it was inconvenient to use gold, silver, and copper as currency. It also consumed a large amount of copper to circulate in the market. Copper happened to be a metal that Rinpoche desperately needed at the moment. Electric wires, voltage regulator rheostat, and telephone lines. The annual copper output of Dayo and the Yun Nation was simply a drop in the bucket compared to what he needed. Copper alloy has excellent wear resistance, corrosion resistance, castability, and mechanical properties. It can also play a great role in a variety of bearings and mechanical parts. Just like on Earth, the quality of a lot of equipment could be determined by looking at whether the internal parts were made of copper. No matter what, Rinpoche couldn't tolerate this metal, which had such huge uses, being used as currency in the market. However, he had to settle the matters in the Yun Nation first before he could do this. What about those sects experts who were in seclusion or wandering outside? More than half of the leaders of more than 100 sects had actually made such a gesture. What were they doing? Or was he hiding from something? Let's wait and see the news that Gluttonous Duke brings back first. If it doesn't work, I might as well capture a few sect leaders and ask them. While Rinpoche was deep in thought, a figure passed through the window and landed beside them. He was wearing patched clothes, had messy white hair and beard, and had a face full of wrinkles. It was Gluttonous Duke. First, he grabbed the wine pot and took a big gulp before letting out a comfortable moan. "You've worked hard. How's the situation? Any news?" Rinpoche asked. Gluttonous Duke stroked his beard with an ugly expression on his face. "We've missed. The people in the stronghold are all gone." "Strange, why did that guy leave? And all the people in the stronghold had left? From what I've seen, he's been gone for at least 3 months, and there's no sign of him returning." Rinpoche frowned. Although he didn't have eyebrows, his action was still the same. This is not good news. This also confirmed Zhang Changkong's words. Some idol experts had gone missing. "What's his name? What's his strength?" "Lin Yi. The last time I saw him was 10 years ago. At that time, he was only 1 step away from condensing a heaven-grade weapon. Those who could condense a heaven-grade weapon were already considered top-notch experts. As long as it wasn't a rare situation where a heaven-grade weapon didn't improve one's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for one to enter the top 60 to 70 ranks of the world's experts. There were more than 20 spirit wheel experts in Tianjin Basin, but only a few had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. There were only 70 to 80 spirit wheel experts in the entire Yun Nation, and only a dozen or so had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. There were more experts in Great Xia. There were more than 200 famous spirit wheel experts and 30 to 40 who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon. They were only 1 step away from condensing a heaven-grade weapon and could be said to be famous in the entire world. Such a person suddenly disappeared, coupled with the experts from the sects who were either in seclusion or traveling. No matter how one looked at it, this matter was very unusual. Rinpoche pondered for a moment before looking up at Li Yuanzhu and Gluttonous Duke. The former was also pondering, while the latter was chewing to his heart's content. One could tell what he liked from his name. He isn't the only one who has gone missing. Many people have gone missing as well. Rinpoche told them about the news that he had received from Zhang Changkong. It was mainly about Gluttonous Duke. Although Li Yuanzhu wasn't in the room at that time, the sounds in the entire inn couldn't escape her ears. In that case, something big must have happened. Gluttonous Duke's expression immediately turned serious. "Let's split up," Rinpoche said in a deep voice. "Gluttonous Duke, contact your old friends and Gao Yi's Jr. If you don't find anything, then take the opportunity to investigate the situation. Gluttonous Duke, you can make the decision yourself. As for Jinren Li, I have something to trouble you with." "That's settled then. Where shall we meet?" Gluttonous Duke didn't hesitate at all. He reached out to wipe the grease stains on the side of his mouth and prepared to set off again. "Meet at Yongjiang City in half a month." A map of the Yun Nation flashed across Rinpoche's mind. The largest sect of the Yun nation was nearby, Mount Luofu. Alright. After saying this, gluttonous Duke disappeared as if he had never been there. There were 2 other tables of customers on the second floor of the restaurant. They had long noticed this strange group of people and immediately widened their eyes when they saw this scene as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. A moment later, Rinpoche contacted Zhang Changkong. Zhang Changkong knew that he was here and had been keeping an eye on him. Less than 15 minutes after Rinpoche left the mark, Zhang Changkong appeared in front of him. Rinpoche inquired about the situation of the surrounding sects and asked Zhang Changkong to investigate Lin Ye's whereabouts. He then found Li Yuanzhu and said, "Jinren, there's a boat gang nearby. I'm going to meet their leader tonight. What are your plans?" "He's in seclusion, right? I'll go with you tonight and take a look. I'm getting more and more curious," Li Yuanzhu said faintly. "Alright. Regardless of whether there's a mastermind behind this, they definitely won't let you off if they know that you're here. If you die, I'm afraid that we'll have to spend the rest of our lives in this land of exile." Rinpoche smiled. He believed that he had a little ability to protect himself, mainly because Lin Xiaola, Xianjie, and Lin Yu had the ability to protect him. However, even the Deputy Protector General and 2 Captain Commanders of the Protectorate of the Northeast were besieged and killed on the same day. The strength of the other party was definitely far superior to his side. Of course, he could escape with a few people and come back with his big treasure. However, there would be a lot more variables. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 937. The Boat Gang. Just from the name, one could tell that it was a gang filled with the aura of a marketplace. The boat gang was established more than 100 years ago. At that time, a boat captain met a seriously injured and dying practitioner by chance and obtained a few secret manuals from him. It had to be said that he was quite talented. Relying on self-study and communicating with others, he was able to make a name for himself and become an earth wheel expert. At that time, he was grateful for the hard life of his brothers who ran the boat. Now that they were strong, he established the boat gang with the aim of uniting them and not being bullied. The current leader of the boat gang was a descendant of that boat captain. In addition to the leader, there were 2 other earth wheel experts in the boat gang. In the middle section of Mianjiang, they were considered to have some power. Of course, in Rinpoche's eyes, this power was basically no different from that of ordinary people. 3 earth wheel experts weren't enough for Lin Xiaola to sharpen her claws. The boat gang wasn't located on the banks of Mianjiang, but at the foot of a mountain not far away. There was a large manor there. At night, Rinpoche and the others left their mounts in the city and went straight to the boat gang. After running for a long time, Lin Yu suddenly asked, "What are you doing out so late at night?" She didn't know anything, and when she saw everyone coming out, she followed them without a second thought. Of course, if she were to think about it, she would have to think about tomorrow morning. "To meet someone," Rinpoche replied. Lin Yu only responded with an "oh." If there were any problems, they would have to wait until tomorrow morning. The headquarters of the boat gang was quite big and brightly lit. There were tens of thousands of disciples in the boat gang, and most of them were ordinary people. There were usually a few hundred people in the headquarters. There were 4 guards outside the main gate. Rinpoche and the others went around to the side and jumped onto the wall. They could see people coming and going in the distance. Overall, it was peaceful and they didn't know that someone had found them. Rinpoche squatted on top of the wall while Lin Yu squatted beside him. They were like a row of melon eaters. Rinpoche heard crunching sounds and turned to see that Lin Yu was still eating melon seeds. He didn't know how many she had brought from Lan City, but she hadn't finished them after so many days. "Be serious. We are doing business," Rinpoche said with a straight face. "You want to eat?" Lin Yu stretched out her hand and opened it. There was still half a handful of melon seeds left. Rinpoche, without hesitation, he snatched the melon seeds and squatted on top of the wall to observe. After finishing half a handful of melon seeds, Rinpoche happened to see someone coming in from the half-moon gate. He was delighted and ordered, "Capture him and keep him alive." With a gust of wind, Xianjie appeared beside that person. Before that person could react, she had already grabbed him by the neck. Rinpoche motioned for Xianjie to release him after dragging him far away. It was a young man in his 20s. He looked at the people in front of him in fear. "Who are you people? Recognize your own situation. I'm the one asking you, not you." A silver light flashed in Rinpoche's hand. A gold and silver spear appeared in his hand, and he pointed it at the other party's throat. She looked at him in astonishment. This was obviously a heaven-grade weapon that could only be condensed by a spirit wheel expert. How could he have one? Was he hiding his strength? Impossible. It was impossible for the other party to hide from him. Or could it be that he was a spirit wheel expert in the past, but he was seriously injured and fell? No matter how much a spirit wheel expert's strength fell, it was impossible for him to fall to the level of an ordinary person. She still remembered the first time she met him. At that time he was a completely ordinary person. The length, color, and the feeling it gave. It was inexplicably familiar. Was it Ting Yu's spear? What was going on? Almost as soon as the silver spear appeared, her attention was completely focused on the spear in Rinpoche's hand. The young man who was being pointed at by the silver spear couldn't believe his eyes when he saw this scene. He then thought of something and his expression suddenly changed. Although few people had seen a spirit wheel expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon, almost all of them were famous figures. How could such a person appear here? Not to mention such a top expert, even an ordinary spirit wheel expert wasn't someone that the boat gang could resist. Senior, what do you want to ask? I don't know much. If you go directly to the headquarters, even the left guardian will answer all your questions. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Rinpoche flipped his palm and withdrew the silver spear. Of course, he could directly barge into the headquarters with his men and threaten the other party to bring him to where the gang leader was cultivating in seclusion. However, that would be too easy to alert the enemy. Up until now, he still didn't know if there were any of his men in the boat gang. He might as well kidnap someone first to understand the situation. I will ask and you will answer. If you are honest, I will spare your life. I don't have any malicious intentions toward the boat gang, but there are some things that I want to understand. Now, let me ask you, is your gang leader cultivating in seclusion? Where is he? How does he communicate with the outside world? How do you know that he is cultivating in seclusion? What happened before he went into seclusion? Who is in charge of the overall situation now? Rinpoche opened his mouth and asked a series of questions. The gang leader is cultivating in a cave in the mountain behind the headquarters. He went in by himself and nothing happened before he went in. Sometimes he would send a voice from inside to get people to send things in. Every time, it is the left guardian who sends the things in. Now, the left guardian is in charge of the overall situation. The other party didn't dare to hide anything and quickly spat out everything he knew. You have two guardians, right? What are their names? What's the other guardian doing? The left guardian is Zhuolengtong, and the right guardian is Baizhou. I heard that they have been sent out by the gang leader to do something. Is the left guardian here? Yes. The gang leader is cultivating in seclusion, and the right guardian is out on some matters. The left guardian has been sitting in the headquarters. After getting the information he wanted, Rinpoche nodded at Li Yuanzhu and asked, "Can you knock him out? I'm afraid that I won't be able to control my strength. You should be more experienced in this matter." Rinpoche really didn't know how much strength was needed to knock someone out, and it would be bad if he was beaten to death. He just needed to not be discovered before he met the gang leader. Li Yuanzhu was a little speechless after hearing this. What did he mean by more experienced? However, she still stretched out her finger and flicked the young man in the air. Let's go to the back mountain. Along the way, Li Yuanzhu wanted to ask Rinpoche about the heaven-grade weapon, but she didn't have the chance. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the back mountain, and she had no choice but to suppress her questions. It didn't take long for everyone to find a platform on the mountainside. There were two man-wheel experts guarding the platform. Without needing Rinpoche to say anything, Li Yuanzhu flicked her finger and knocked them out. Everyone landed on the platform and didn't look around. They only saw two tall wooden doors embedded in a cave in front of them. If she wasn't mistaken, this was where the gang leader was cultivating in seclusion. Without hesitation, Rinpoche stepped forward and kicked the wooden door. Bang! The entire wooden door shook. Rinpoche's face suddenly lit up. It was colorful and exceptionally exciting. This wooden door was actually made of wood covered with iron plates. Damn it, I've kicked an iron plate this time. This thought came to Rinpoche's mind, and the sharp pain in his toes made him gasp. Ah! Rinpoche breathed heavily as if this could alleviate the pain in his feet. Li Yuanzhu, who was beside him, felt like laughing for some reason. This scene was indeed too exciting. Chapter 938. The doctor probably felt that I had damaged his reputation by causing such a small wound. He was a little anxious and strictly forbade me from sitting down to work at night. In addition, my work and rest schedule also affected the healing of the wound. I might as well take a day off last night. Today I will get a bed and table and lie on the bed to write my novel. The pretty boy of the Empress's family took a day off yesterday. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 939. The black mud ointment for external injuries and the ointment for bone fracture were the two miraculous medicines that must be brought out whenever one went out. Regardless of whether it was for a vacation or to silence a witness who would not be killed by someone else. At this time, the value of this godly medicine was revealed. Ren Baqin sat at the side, took off his boots and carefully applied the ointment. Lin Yu, who was standing at the side, seemed to have thought of something. She went up and kicked the wooden door. Boom. Ah, it's really made of iron. Lin Yu confirmed her suspicions with a limp. She took off her embroidered shoes and revealed her white feet. As expected, her toes were visibly red and swollen. He's not in the right mind and neither are you? Can't you just use a kick? Lin Xiaola said resentfully. Ren Baqin, how could he endure Lin Xiaola's words? Li Yuanzhu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lin Yu had never been like this before? He heard the noise coming from the foot of the mountain. The noise just now had already spread down, and he reckoned that someone would come up very soon. She went forward and pushed the door with both hands, but it didn't budge. It seemed like a simple push, but Li Yuanzhu used a lot of strength. Even though the door was made of pure iron, it was still sent flying by her push. The door of the boat gang's seclusion place was indeed very sturdy. Not only was the door made of fine steel, but some rare metals had also been added to it. That was indeed the case. Not only was the door made of fine steel, even the stone walls on both sides were made of fine steel. Not only was this cave a place for seclusion, but it also served as an escape route. When Ren Baqin first built this mountain villa, he considered that if he encountered an enemy that he couldn't defend against, this door could at least hold off an ordinary spirit wheel expert for 10 minutes. A cyan bamboo sword appeared in her palm out of thin air. She pointed it forward without making too much noise, but countless cracks spread from the center of the bamboo sword to the surroundings. Soon after, the entire door suddenly collapsed. The door that the boat gang had placed their hopes on was smashed by this simple and ordinary touch. It's empty? Li Yuanzhu said after taking a glance. As expected, it's empty. Ren Baqin wasn't surprised at all. In fact, when he heard that many sex experts were in seclusion, he had already thought of this possibility. There were only 3 possibilities for the whereabouts of these experts. Either they pretended to be in closed-door training, or they were forced into closed-door training, or they were already dead and the closed-door training was just a facade. This time he only came to confirm what kind of person it was. In fact, after that kick, there was no reaction from inside, so he knew it was empty. He reckoned that the poison had been hidden in his mouth all along. However, this person was really decisive to commit suicide immediately upon seeing that the situation wasn't looking good. What exactly was the identity of this left protector? The manipulator behind the scenes has such strong control? This person was walking at the back, so I thought he was a lackey. Xanja added, explaining why she stepped on him. She also knew what Ren Baqin wanted to investigate this time, but the first person he investigated committed suicide by taking poison. She felt somewhat apologetic. Forget it. If I didn't know that they would do this, it would indeed be difficult to guard against them. I will have experience next time. Ren Baqin didn't care too much. Although he was already dead, it also verified one thing. There was a big problem with these experts going into seclusion. Furthermore, there was indeed someone from the other party in the boat gang, and he was one of the 2 protectors under the chief. It wasn't only the boat gang but also the other sections. Everyone, what exactly happened? The man who spoke earlier asked in a pleading tone. After all, the boat gang didn't have the strength to question the people in front of them. Your chief isn't inside. It's empty. As for his whereabouts, I'm afraid only Zhuolengtang knows. You have seen the rest, Ren Baqin said faintly. Are you looking for our chief? We just want to verify some things. Now we have achieved half of our goal. Ren Baqin couldn't be bothered to explain too much, and the other party didn't need to know too much. It was already kind of him to explain this. Let's go. Ren Baqin turned and left in the direction where there were no torches. He wasn't afraid of encountering any conflicts with the boat gang, but there was no need to kill more people. This time he came out to save people, not to kill. More importantly, his heart was heavy at the moment and he was even in pain. Damn it, that door actually opened outward. Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version website. Come. Chapter 940. Let's wait and see. Perhaps someone will come out and release a messenger bird or something. Rinpoche circled around and returned to the outside of the manor. Compared to checking them one by one, following the vines to the melon was obviously a better method. Exange, go to the east side of the manor, Rinpoche said. Her Majesty asked me to follow you. Exange was expressionless. He sighed, cupped his hands at her and said, "Thank you for your trouble." She chuckled and disappeared into the darkness in a flash. After she left, he turned to look at the people around him. They were all very good fighters, but unfortunately none of them were useful. One of them clearly stated that he was here to monitor him, one of them might sleep for 100 years after he was released, and the last one had a bad brain. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Lin Yu moved closer to him and asked weakly. "Ask away. Why did you kick the door just now?" Lin Yu felt pity for her toes. "My toes are swollen." Rinpoche looked at Lin Yu and then at the sky. How should he answer this question? Say that he had a screw loose? Let's not talk about why I kicked the door. Why did you kick the door? Lin Yu waited for a long time, but there was no answer. She persistently asked, "Why?" Rinpoche turned his head and looked at her. He didn't expect her to be so persistent this time. He thought for a while and said, "To test a conjecture." Rinpoche originally wanted to wait for her to ask before telling her that punching a wall would hurt. This was the reaction of force. He didn't expect her to respond with an "oh," and continue to be deep in thought at the side. Rinpoche felt as if he had punched cotton. He was depressed and sullen. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have thought about it. Everyone waited until the sky brightened, but they still didn't receive the pigeons that they had expected. There was no point in waiting any longer, so they might as well take the time to visit the other sections. "How did you get that heaven-grade weapon?" Along the way, Li Yuanzhu finally had the chance to ask the question that she had been thinking about all night. Rinpoche's face darkened. "This is probably what it means to be gifted. Although I haven't reached the spirit wheel level yet, I have already condensed a heaven-grade weapon." As he spoke, an iron chain shot out from his body like a snake and coiled around her body a few times. Coincidentally, it was at the top of the mountain and the bottom of the mountain respectively. But it was useless. The prerequisite was that there must be a mountain. Li Yuanzhu's expression changed slightly, and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't pay much attention to the metal chain when it came, but the position where it wrapped around her made her very concerned. She looked at him with a profound gaze. "Sorry, I'm not very familiar with it yet," Rinpoche said awkwardly. He had only given the order to keep the other party occupied. He really did not choose this position, and he would not take advantage of an airport. A heaven-grade weapon is condensed by the owner's spirit and is like an extension of the owner's limbs. What the heaven-grade weapon senses is what the owner feels. There was a hint of coldness in her words. "Although I'm not Qi Zixiao, I don't mind breaking my limbs." "I didn't. I picked this up. Where did I get this thing? Condensing a divine weapon? How could this be? Also, have you ever seen anyone condense two divine weapons? Not to mention that I'm only an earthwheel expert." Rinpoche immediately changed his words. This was the first time he had heard of this. "You picked it up?" Li Yuanzhu's face was full of indecipherable meaning. "I picked it up, I really picked it up." Rinpoche nodded repeatedly. He really wasn't taking advantage of her. "Xianja? What are you doing? What did you write in the book?" After wasting a long time, Rinpoche was still explaining that he picked up this heaven-grade weapon. As for whether she believed him or not, it was obvious from her expression that she didn't. However, Rinpoche himself couldn't explain it clearly. After all, he wasn't prepared to tell her about Earth. Besides, she couldn't figure out why he had two heaven-grade weapons and could only continue to be puzzled. Yun Nation, Hayun District, Misty Rain House. Very few of these sects were located in the cities. Most of them were located in famous mountains and rivers or even in the wilderness. This was the case with the Misty Rain House. The ancestors of the Misty Rain House used to be famous. At its peak, there were 7 spirit wheel experts in the sect, and they were considered to be famous. However, only the chief of the sect was a spirit wheel expert. Even so, the Misty Rain House was still quite famous. The most important thing was that all the disciples in the Misty Rain House were female, and each of them had a slim figure. It was as if they were shrouded in mist, making it hard for people to see them clearly. Although they were clearly standing there and there was no fog around them, it gave off such an illusion. As the ancients said, those who wore clothes were more beautiful than those who weren't. The disciples of the Misty Rain House were the opposite. Even if they weren't wearing clothes, they wouldn't disappoint you at all. Therefore, the female disciples of the Misty Rain House had always been the targets of many young heroes and rich young masters. Early in the morning, a drawn-out voice broke through the thin morning mist that shrouded the Misty Rain House. "Suning, Guardian Su, please come out." No noise outside the Misty Rain House. Who's there? Figures shot out like lightning, and one by one, the graceful ladies landed outside the Misty Rain House. Rinpoche glanced around with his hands behind his back. Although the Misty Rain House only had one spirit wheel expert, there were a lot of earth wheel experts. There were also many high-level man-wheel disciples. Their foundation was indeed much deeper than those small sects. The disciples were indeed not bad. Their looks were also not bad. They were clearly standing there for everyone to see, but there was always a sense of mystery that was shrouded in mist. The Misty Rain House was indeed worthy of its name. More than 20 people jumped out with angry looks on their faces. They were obviously angry that someone actually dared to make a ruckus outside the Misty Rain House. Who are you? You're really bold to actually make a ruckus outside the Misty Rain House and even ask Guardian Su to come and see you? Who are you? Have you sent a visitation card? Is this person's head smeared with oil? Who's that Taoist nun? She's so beautiful. She looks so fierce. She doesn't seem like a good person. The ancients once said that a woman was equivalent to 500 ducks. Faced with 10,000 ducks, Rinpoche immediately felt uncomfortable and immediately understood what his Baihu meant when he said that this place was more noisy. "Zhao, Prince Consort of Dayo, is here. Suning, come out and pay your respects," Rinpoche said with a sullen face. This was already the 10th day since they left the boat gang. Rinpoche and his group had gone to 17 sects at top speed. Other than the boat gang and the life and death sect that they went to on the first day, the people who contacted the other sects had either disappeared or committed suicide. They didn't see anyone alive. Rinpoche knew that the other party already knew that he was here to investigate this matter, so he didn't hide it anymore. Where did this madman come from? Zhao. Before he could finish his sentence, he was covered up by someone. Is he Zhao, Prince Consort of Dayo? He looks so handsome. His forehead is so shiny. He's indeed not an ordinary person. Zhao, Prince Consort has arrived. Please forgive me for not coming out to greet you. Finally, someone came out to take charge of the situation. It was a rather charming woman in her 30s. She was thick in places where she should be thick and thin. To put it simply, she had a bucket-like figure. However, her expression was refreshing, and her voice was full of energy. She wasn't annoying at all. The people in the Misty Rain House are all little girls who are ignorant of worldly affairs and didn't know that you were here. Please be magnanimous and don't blame us. The person laughed. Are you Suning? Rinpoche sized her up. I'm an Iru. Guardian Su should have come out to greet you, but she has been seriously ill these days. If you want to see her, you can only meet her at the door. But please forgive me for not recognizing you. Can you prove your identity? An Iru bowed and apologized with a smile on her face. The silver spear in Rinpoche's hand appeared out of thin air and then disappeared without a trace. This thing was more useful than any proof of identity. An expert who had condensed a spirit wheel and a heaven-grade weapon was well known in this world, so he naturally wouldn't lie. As for whether the rumored Zhao Prince Consort had such strength, no one dared to doubt it. Sure enough, an Iru's gaze froze. She then bowed and said, I was rash. Zhao Prince Consort, please come in. She waved to both sides and everyone dispersed. After Rinpoche followed her into the Misty Rain House, she probed, May I know why Zhao Prince Consort is looking for Sister Su? Where's your chief? Rinpoche asked. She's in seclusion in a secret chamber and can't be disturbed. I'm afraid we can only wait for her to come out of seclusion before she can meet Zhao Prince Consort to apologize in person. Rinpoche nodded. He didn't ask to meet the chief since the final outcome would be the same anyway. It was more important to meet Suning first. Wasn't Suning fine a few days ago? Why did she suddenly fall ill? Rinpoche asked faintly. In fact, Guardian Su has been ill for a long time, but her condition suddenly worsened recently. Guardian Su, please explain the specifics. Aniru led Rinpoche and the others for more than 10 minutes. There were many courtyards and embroidery buildings on both sides, and it was filled with the smell of women. From time to time, they could see beautiful young girls bowing to them from afar. In particular, there was a woman with picturesque features, a slim figure and extremely attractive. She bowed to them from afar, got up with a smile on her face, and her eyes were sparkling. This is the most outstanding disciple of the next generation in the Misty Rain House. Her name is Yuan Qingyi. After hearing about what you did for the captive camp, she has always been very grateful to you. Someone must have told her about it, so she specially came out to meet you. Aniru chuckled. Ren Baqin glanced at her. She was indeed excellent, especially with the mixture of immaturity and shyness on her body. Any man would be attracted to her. Unfortunately, Xianzhe was with him. Xianzhe, what are you doing? What are you writing in the book? The group walked a few rounds and came to a courtyard. Aniru said, Guardian Su looks a little scary when she's sick. You must be mentally prepared. Ren Baqin nodded. Aniru stood outside a small building and said, Guardian Su is on the second floor. This way, please. As soon as Ren Baqin lifted his foot, Aniru stopped the people behind him and said, Very well. Guardian Su's illness is only transmitted to women and not to men. If you want to go in, you must make some preparations. Ren Baqin was a little curious. What kind of illness was only transmitted to women and not to men? He stepped over the threshold and walked a few steps inside. The first floor of the building was full of paintings, especially the woman in red in the painting. Ren Baqin couldn't take his eyes off her. Although the woman was just standing there, she gave off the vibe of a towering mountain and was cold. Ren Baqin recognized her at a glance. That was obviously the Empress. Why was the Empress's painting here? Why was there a painting of the Empress here? The people outside saw Ren Baqin standing there looking at the painting, but they didn't care. They were about to take the veil that Aniru handed over to cover their faces when something unexpected happened. Aniru suddenly exploded without warning, and the sky was filled with a rain of blood. Everyone subconsciously hid. Then, a few loud noises and the ground trembled came from the small building. Everyone took a closer look and saw that the door of the small building was blocked by a 6-inch thick pitch-black iron plate, or rather a piece of iron that had fallen from the top of the door. Oh no, there's danger. Li Yuanzhu dodged and pointed her sword forward. At this moment, a terrifying sword energy shot out from outside the wall, forcing her to turn around to save herself. Lin Xiaola, who was the fastest, had already crashed into the window next to her. Boom. The iron plate wasn't a single piece. The entire interior of the small building was surrounded by the iron plate. Ren Baqin was inside and everyone else was outside. Xianzhe's face changed drastically, and her skin began to turn red as if blood was about to drip from the surface of her skin. Her aura rose steadily as she punched the iron block inside the door, each punch stronger than the previous one. After 3 punches, the 6-inch thick iron block was directly smashed into pieces and exploded. However, there was no one in the room. Let's set a small goal first. Chapter 941. Li Yuanzhu stood with her sword in her right hand and looked at the big hole in the courtyard wall. Her eyes became extremely dark like an abyss that seemed to be able to swallow people and the world. Su Wuming? The sword energy just now was so amazing that she had no choice but to turn over and protect herself. Among the famous experts in the world, only one person could use this sword energy, Su Wuming, who had been in hiding for a long time. Moreover, she had heard a little about Su Wuming from Ren Baqin. Sigh, you don't know what you are doing. The person outside the courtyard wall didn't reveal himself and only let out a long sigh. It's you who doesn't know what you are doing. Li Yuanzhu traversed more than 30 meters in an instant, leaving a faint line behind her. When she pointed with her sword, the air, flowers, and courtyard wall in front of her suddenly disappeared as if an invisible beast had bitten them off. Ding! A sword ray suddenly appeared in front of her, as if it was creating something out of nothing. In other words, it tore through space and appeared in front of Li Yuanzhu. The 2 swords collided and made a soft sound. Li Yuanzhu tapped her feet and retreated several meters. There were abnormal fluctuations in the air. The air on one side of Li Yuanzhu seemed to have encountered an invisible black hole and was sucked toward a certain point. Even the air began to distort. On the other side, the sound of cloth tearing could be heard, and one could vaguely see abnormal cracks in the air. Both sides were in a stalemate for a moment when a certain point in the air suddenly exploded. A gust of wind swept through and soil flew everywhere. However, a cold sword ray tore through everything and went straight for Li Yuanzhu's face. Ding, ding, ding. Li Yuanzhu's expression changed slightly. She pointed her sword 3 times in a row and retreated from one end of the courtyard to the other before the sword ray dissipated. However, the aura on the other end of the courtyard wall had already gone far away. Li Yuanzhu frowned and rushed into the house, only to see that the ground had been turned upside down. Even the ground was made of fine steel, but there was a hole in one place. Xianzhe and Lin Xiaola had already jumped down. Lin Yu was still standing there eating melon seeds and obviously hadn't recovered yet. "Follow me," Li Yuanzhu said before jumping down. Lin Yu touched her head, looked upstairs and then at her feet. She pondered for a moment before jumping down. It would take a long time to describe, but everything happened in an instant. It was about 20 meters underground. She jumped down and saw Xanzhe and Lin Xiaola. There were 6 paths in front of them, or it could be said that the bottom of the house was just one of the nodes of these paths. Which direction? Xanzhe's face was gloomy. Her fist was bleeding profusely, but it was as if she didn't feel anything. Lin Xiaola sniffled and sniffled again. Finally she lay on the ground and sniffled. She raised her head with a puzzled expression. "There's no smell of that guy. But the most recent smell is heading in that direction." Without saying a word, Xanzhe chased after the passageway that Lin Xiaola had pointed out. After chasing for an hour, the group saw a ray of light ahead of them, and the sound of water followed. Rushing out, they found themselves beside a waterfall. "Where should we go?" Xanzhe asked again. "The smell is gone. It seems to have stopped here." Xanzhe's face was filled with doubt. "Water." Li Yuanzhu was the first to react. Lin Yu followed behind the 3 of them, deep in thought. What are they going to do? Prince Zhao was still upstairs. At this moment Rinpochen was smiling, but it was a bitter smile. He heard Li Yuanzhu shout, "Su Wuming." He also heard Xanzhe smashing the metal plate downstairs. He also knew that everyone had jumped into a hole in the ground. However, he didn't dare to say a word. Everyone was simply too fast. Before he could think of a way to spread the news that he was here, they had already disappeared. The other party had used some unknown method to conceal their auras, and even Li Yuanzhu didn't realize that they were upstairs. Everyone subconsciously thought that they had been caught and escaped through the tunnel. "Brother, you are still quite obedient." A charming and seductive voice rang in Rinpochen's ear. The face that was next to his slowly moved away, and the jade-like hand that was stuck on his neck was slowly released. The hand was beautiful. It was as if it was carved out of white jade. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a jade-like hand. If this was the most beautiful hand in the world, Rinpochen would consider it and nod in agreement. The fingernails on the hand were also very long, at least 2 centimeters long. There weren't any flaws at all, and it was obvious that the owner took great care of them. Otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do this. Although Rinpochen didn't see it, he could imagine that there wouldn't be a speck of dust on such long fingernails. With such a beautiful hand and flawless fingernails, the owner must be very beautiful as well. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Rinpochen had to admit that he always met beautiful women. For example, the Empress, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, Xanzhe, and the cross-dresser. However, the woman in front of him was still breathtakingly beautiful. Purple eyeshadow was still very rare in this world. She had loose bangs, red lips that were like flames, a pair of phoenix eyes that were somewhat similar to the Empress's, and there was a mole at the corner of her eye. All of these combined to form a woman that made Rinpochen feel breathtakingly beautiful. Most importantly, she was protruding forward and concave back. Just now, Rinpochen felt that he had dribbled the ball into someone. He had to say that it was a good ball. However, Rinpochen felt that the most breathtakingly beautiful thing wasn't the beauty of this woman, but the smell of her pink fingernails. It was a sweet and intoxicating smell. He didn't need to think to know that it was poisonous, and it was extremely poisonous. He didn't know if the other party would have died if he had made any strange moves just now, but he was definitely going to die. At this moment, she pulled her face away and looked at Rinpochen with a smile. "Hello, big sister." Rinpochen looked as obedient and well-behaved as a harmless young man could be. Unfortunately, he forgot that he had a fierce face, a bald head and no eyebrows. Inexplicably, he thought of the time when he first met the Empress. It seemed like he had to survive in a desperate situation again. "It's been a long time since someone called me big sister." The woman touched her face and sighed. Slap. Rinpochen was stunned by the sudden slap. A wave of anger rose from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. However, he calmed down in the blink of an eye. He swung his hand and slapped himself. The woman opened her small mouth slightly and was obviously a little surprised. Just now, both sides weren't very symmetrical. "This looks better." Rinpochen smiled. The woman smiled and looked at him with interest as if she was re-examining him. Then she turned around in front of Rinpochen and asked, "Am I beautiful?" "Who said that you aren't beautiful? You must be blind." "I'm not blind." Rinpochen replied honestly. "Therefore, I can't say that you aren't beautiful." "Then between me and Qi Zixiao, who is more beautiful?" The woman's eyes were full of expectation as if she was a young girl waiting for her sweetheart to praise her. However, Rinpoche knew that this person in front of him wasn't easy to deal with. In fact, apart from Lin Yu, whose brain circuit was like the Mariana Trench, and Lin Xiaola, who could increase her cultivation level in her sleep, no one who could cultivate to this level was easy to deal with. Furthermore, this was a fatal question. I know of a mirror. As long as you ask it, magic mirror, who is the most beautiful person in the world, it will tell you. Rinpoche said. I think it will definitely tell you that you are the most beautiful person in the world. Do you mean that I'm more beautiful than Qi Zixiao? The woman's eyes were slightly sarcastic. I mean, if someone else were to ask it, it would say the same thing. Otherwise, it would have been smashed long ago. Rinpoche spread his hands. Slap. As soon as he finished speaking, Rinpoche received another slap. The woman first slapped him, then gently stroked his cheek as if she was caressing her lover's cheek. Does it hurt? Rinpoche gritted his teeth. This woman was simply a crazy knife. He then smiled and said, I don't think I lost out. I think all the men in the world are willing to take this slap. It's good that you're not angry. The woman smiled happily. You are so obedient that I can't bear to hit you. Chapter 942. Although the woman said this, Rinpoche knew that he wouldn't die for the time being. Otherwise he would have died just now. Since the other party didn't kill him immediately, it meant that there was something on him that she wanted. The problem was how important the thing she wanted was to her. Otherwise she could still kill him at any time. Rinpoche wasn't too worried about this since he had too many things in his mind. The next problem was, how could he survive and find a way to escape from his opponent? He had to do it within 4 days. This was because he would be returning to Earth in 4 days. Think about it. If he suddenly disappeared, the other party would be confused. If he suddenly appeared and saw the other party's face, he would be confused. Overall, Rinpoche analyzed the situation and realized that there was good news and bad news. The good news was that he had found the person behind the scenes. The bad news was he was caught by the other party. In any case, he had found the person behind the scenes, right? At least he found some clues. Half of the purpose of coming here was accomplished. The other half was how to go back alive and turn around to find a big treasure. If something went wrong, the Empress would really become a widow. Rinpoche thought about it and smiled. The more this was the time, the more he had to smile. How should I address you, big sister? As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a stinging pain on his face. Aren't you going to ask why I hit you? The woman smiled brightly. A woman like you can be forgiven no matter what you do. Since I have to forgive you, why ask? Rinpoche's face was burning, but his expression didn't change at all. He was smiling as brightly as the other party. At this point he was completely in the zone. He had thrown aside his identity and the pampered life he had been living for the past few years. Now he just wanted to survive and find a chance to escape. As for revenge, that was something to be done after he escaped. I'm starting to understand why Qi Zixiao likes you, the woman suddenly said. Rinpoche smiled and didn't say anything. I've seen a lot of shameless people and I've also seen a lot of two-faced people, but it's really rare to see someone like you, the woman said faintly. As for my name, it's fine to tell you so that you can die without knowing. Yun Yuhan. I don't think anyone knows this name. Rinpoche was moved. No one knew this name? In other words, he wasn't on the expert ranking? Was it because the other party had used a pseudonym, or was there some other reason? There was no need for Yun Yuhan to give him a fake name at a time like this. Yun Yuhan should be his real name. What? Su Wuming was there, but this person wasn't? It had always been a mystery who created the ranking of the world experts. It was only known that it would appear every year. And this organization was also a mystery. Are these two the same organization? The other party created Su Wuming as a face to walk the world and hid the others? Why were these experts willing to do this? They hid their identities just to prevent people like him, who wanted to leave the banished land, from appearing? For the sake of his own life, Rinpoche's brain was working at high speed. He was able to analyze so much from just one sentence from her. You don't seem to be afraid? Do you think they can come back and save you? The woman looked at Rinpoche's expression and smiled. If that was possible, you and I wouldn't be here now, Rinpoche said calmly. You're a smart person. It's a pity that you only look smart but do stupid things. The woman shook her head slightly. She grabbed Rinpoche by the neck, broke the window and ran into the distance. They made a few turns along the way, ran along the river for more than 5 kilometers and returned to land. After another hour they arrived at a small manor. Strong winds blew all the way, and their speed wasn't much slower than the Empress's. Rinpoche estimated that it took them 5.5 hours to travel at a speed of about 350 kilometers per hour, which was more than 1,600 kilometers. Including the detours along the way, the straight-line distance was more than 800 kilometers. The direction was probably to the north, near the border with Great Xia. At this distance, Li Yuanzhu and the others definitely wouldn't be able to find him. Rinpoche began to worry. If he was imprisoned in this place, he would really be done for. He would definitely be discovered going back and forth to Earth. Even if he used words to fool them, it could only be done once, twice, or thrice. Perhaps they would be brought to Earth by him. That would be really troublesome. What kind of people were in this manor? How long would he be imprisoned? How would they treat him after finding out his secret? Rinpoche went through all of these in his mind. All the options were passive, and his life was in the hands of others. Not only was his life in their hands, but what about the Empress? If they really made a move, would the Empress be a match for them? At the thought of this, the sense of crisis in Rinpoche's heart intensified. He had to find a way to change the situation. When Yun Yuhan landed in the courtyard, people immediately greeted her from afar. They were all young men in their 30s or 40s, and they seemed to be very respectful to her. Seeing this scene, Rinpoche suddenly had an idea. She was a woman, and a very powerful one at that. She was a woman with a high status. He only had one active way to turn defeat into victory, and that was to woo her. This idea suddenly came to Rinpoche's mind. Just because I'm so handsome. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that the most important thing for a person was still talent. He couldn't always rely on his looks to make a living. Yun Yuhan threw him into a side room and said with a smile, "Stay here for now. Don't even think about escaping. With your strength, you won't be able to escape." The treatment is better than I thought. Rinpoche looked around. He then looked at Yun Yuhan and asked, "How are you going to treat me next? What do you want to know from me? Let me say this first. Don't think about torturing me. I'm afraid of pain. You can consider seducing me. Maybe I'll confess." Yun Yuhan smiled as she watched Rinpoche's performance. She moved closer to Rinpoche and directly rammed him with the ball. 2 soft mounds on her chest and a delicate fragrance assailed his nostrils. "How do you want to seduce you?" Her soft words directly blew into Rinpoche's ears with hot air. Rinpoche deliberately took a step back and said, "First, tell me what you want since you didn't kill me and brought me here." Yun Yuhan followed closely behind and gently blew into his ear. "Now that there's no one to disturb us, you and I have time to talk." Seeing that she was sticking close to him, Rinpoche made up his mind and lowered his head slightly. A man and a woman alone in a room. Why don't we do something more meaningful? What do you want to do? Yun Yuhan asked with a cold look in her eyes. For example, dance? To be able to dance with a woman like you, I wouldn't trade it even if I became an immortal. Rinpoche reached out to grab Yun Yuhan's hands. Her movements were a little unnatural and Rinpoche noticed it. He immediately knew that she was a paper tiger. However, she wanted to see what tricks he was playing, so she let him grab her hands. "You wouldn't trade it even if you became an immortal?" Yun Yuhan said in a charming voice full of ridicule. "What's there to die for? I'm willing to be a mandarin duck and not envy immortals. Mandarin ducks are really enviable. Don't you see me when I come and go? I hate embroidery of a lone swan on the curtain so that I can paste a pair of swallows on the door curtain. Swallows fly around the painted beam, and the curtain is covered with tulips. Patches of clouds touch the hair of cicadas, and the slender moon turns yellow." As Rinpoche spoke, he put one hand on his waist and the other on his shoulder. He recited a part of Chang, an ancient meaning without the beginning and end, hummed a canon, and led her to dance in the center of the room. Yun Yuhan's eyes flickered, and she suddenly stopped smiling. She let Rinpoche lead her to dance like a puppet. It had to be said that she was much better at learning than the Empress. After stepping on Rinpoche a few times, she knew what to do. Rinpoche and the Empress had danced to the same song a few times, but at that time he felt sweet in his heart. At this time he was holding a soft body, but his heart was freezing cold. Both of them were smiling, but they were holding a knife in their hearts. The only difference was that Rinpoche had what she wanted, and this was what he was relying on. Other than that, everything was in her hands. On the other hand, the other party treated him like a monkey in her palm and was very interested in enjoying the novel experience that he brought. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 943. After the dance, Yun Yuhan took a step back and slapped him in the face. Stay here. Someone will come and ask you. After saying this, Yun Yuhan left the room. Rinpoche touched his cheek and felt a burning pain. His eyes were full of fierceness like a ferocious tiger, but he restrained it after a while. He had just come up with this idea and immediately made such a choice just for an opportunity. It might not necessarily be useful, and he didn't need the other party to have a good impression of him. As long as the other party hesitated at the critical moment, it would be enough. In times of survival like this, every opportunity had to be grasped. Perhaps one could save his life. Although this wasn't the only opportunity, Rinpoche always felt that he was more talented in this area. Of course, the premise was that the other party wasn't the kind of person who had seen countless men. If that was the case, Rinpoche reckoned that he would be swallowed whole. He had never felt that he was smarter than the people of this world. Except for the aboriginals. Fortunately, some of the details just now made him realize that the other party was just a paper tiger, which was good news. Yun Yuhan said that someone would come, but he didn't know who it would be. Could it be Su Wuming? How many people were there in this organization? What kind of organizational structure was it? What was Su Wuming's position in it? What about Yun Yuhan? If he took the initiative to surrender, he didn't know if he would have more opportunities. He would disappear every 7 days and this couldn't be changed. He wouldn't be able to keep up the pretense of civility for long. Would the Empress be very worried about his disappearance? He was afraid that she would go straight to the Yun Nation from Lan City, and probably do something extreme. He was still careless. While he was looking for the other party had already prepared a trap and was waiting for him to crash into it. However, the change was so fast that he and the others were caught off guard. Even if they were more careful, as long as he was still investigating this matter, it would be inevitable. Rinpoche thought about it, then found a place to close his eyes and rest while waiting for someone to come. After about half an hour, Rinpoche felt something strange around him. He opened his eyes and saw a scholar with a long beard sitting on a chair not far away, looking at him with a smile. Another spirit wheel expert, Rinpoche thought. To be able to appear in front of him without him noticing, this person was undoubtedly a spirit wheel expert. Rinpoche nodded politely and asked, "How should I address you?" "Wen Shaoxing." The scholar smiled. Rinpoche thought for a while and realized that he hadn't seen this name on the list of experts before. It was another person who wasn't on the list. "What is your purpose?" "Pretty much what you're thinking. Warriors of love and peace." "Work hard for world peace?" Rinpoche asked with a smile. The other party's smile froze for a moment. As a person who thought highly of himself, it was inevitable for his heart to waver when he was evaluated in such a manner. Then he smiled. It was not the kind of smile that seemed to be fixed on his face, but the kind that seemed to have thought of something interesting. He nodded slowly. "You can say that. You have a divine weapon?" With a flip of his palm, a silver-white spear appeared in front of him. Wen Shaoxing looked at it carefully, and an unknown light flashed in his eyes. It's 6 feet and 3 inches long, gold and silver in color, and there are patterns of the listening rain flower on the spear body. It is indeed Tingyu's listening rain spear. Rinpoche's gaze froze. Even he didn't know what the pattern on the spear was, but the other party actually recognized it at a glance. With such a good understanding of Tingyu's spear, Rinpoche increasingly suspected that the other party was the same group of people who made the list of experts. "I'm very curious as to why Tingyu's divine weapon didn't dissipate and instead fell into your hands. I heard that before Tengyu died he shouted, 'Where's my spear?' in a voice filled with grief and indignation. It seems that this listening rain spear fell into your hands before he died." Rinpoche's eyes flickered. The other party even knew about this matter. At that time, in addition to the aboriginals, there were some experts from the Jing tribe, and there seemed to be some commoners. The other party might have gotten the news from them. "Are you really doing this for the survival of the human race?" Rinpoche asked instead of answering. "That's right. You really do know. Nothing is more important than the survival of the entire race. This is righteousness. Unfortunately, there are always some people who like to do stupid things and bring the entire race to the brink of destruction." Wen Shaoxing looked at Rinpoche with regret. "So, you kill the future of the human race time and time again?" Rinpoche asked with slight sarcasm. He wanted to disturb the other party's state of mind and make them doubt whether everything they did was right. At that time he would have a better chance. "The future? If that future is the destruction of the entire human race. You are too arrogant. You don't know what you are facing. This isn't the only group of humans. Ren Baqin said with a faint smile, his eyes full of mockery. Wen Xiaoxing suddenly froze and tensed up like a creature whose tail had been stepped on. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he asked, "What did you say?" "I said that the human race isn't limited to this group of people from the land of exile. 2 groups of humans escaped back then, and the other group is at the other end of the sea," Ren Baqin said calmly. After listening to Ren Baqin's words, Wen Xiaoxing suddenly laughed and asked, "Do you know what is in the sea? If it weren't for your last sentence, I would have been really scared by you. It's nothing more than storms and beasts." Ren Baqin was actually relying on guessing, but when it came to the sea, he only knew about these things. Do you know about submarines? Do you know about ironclad ships? Do you know about satellite navigation? Do you know about Yamato warships? Do you know about SOD? Ren Baqin threw out a bunch of words that the other party couldn't understand before saying calmly, "You are just a group of people with limited vision and thinking. You hide in your own world and live in fear. You think that you are doing this for the entire human race, but in fact, you are just pitiful people who are afraid of everything." His expression was arrogant, as if the person in front of him wasn't a spirit wheel expert who could easily crush him, but a dog that could be seen everywhere. The other party didn't care about his expression and just stared blankly at Ren Baqin as if he was shocked by his series of words that he didn't understand. "You, that's right. I'm a pioneer who came from that land. In fact, it's not just me. We have sent dozens of people out over the years, and each time, we split up and went in different directions to search for One Piece. You are just an unexpected gain for me. We have done far more than you can imagine. We can communicate with each other over long distances, and each of us can know what is happening in our land at any time. We have weapons that can destroy the world. We have eliminated the Zerg and the Protoss, and our next goal is to recapture our homeland. When I set foot on this land and found you who share the same bloodline as us, I was shocked by your backwardness. You haven't developed for thousands of years and are even weaker than before." Ren Baqin's face was full of pride, deeply proud of the land he was on. "It's really hard to imagine that as humans, you have fallen so far." Ren Baqin shook his head slightly, and his eyes were full of resentment. "What makes it even harder for me to imagine is that in this land, there is actually a group of people like you who think that they are righteous, but have actually become a cancer." As for Wen Xiaoxing, his face was full of confusion. Chapter 944. Wen Xiaoxing's eyes flickered. Ren Baqin's words had a great impact on his worldview. Ren Baqin's gaze made him feel like he was a fool. Nonsense. Wen Xiaoxing used all his strength to open his mouth and spit out 4 words. A bunch of nonsense? Ren Baqin was arrogant and looked at Wen Xiaoxing as if he was looking at a lousy person. He said, "You're all a bunch of losers." Although Wen Xiaoxing did not know what this word meant, he could imagine that it was not something good. The world has changed. Can't you see it? Can't you see the war between Dayo and Great Xia and the Yun Nation? Can't you see those weapons that have never appeared before? Why were Dayo's troop movements, joint attacks and pincer attacks so accurate? Why is Dayo's army able to be commanded so easily? Are you guys blind? Of course, those things may be beyond your imagination. I can only say that your imagination can't keep up with reality. Ren Baqin's face was full of pity. Wen Xiaoxing only felt a stuffiness in his chest, making him almost unable to breathe. He was indeed studying the changes in Dayo's army. However, Ren Baqin's words were like a hot knife stabbing into his chest. He couldn't even imagine what others could do. How sorrowful was this? Lan City has become a city that never sleeps. I'm sure all of you have heard about the chandeliers that cover the entire city. Don't you know anything about the forging factories built all over the Chuyin mine? These are only the most superficial techniques. However, if you want to develop them on your own, with your state of not making any progress for thousands of years, I'm afraid it will take hundreds or even thousands of years. Those glasses, mirrors, these little things that I took out casually, yet you can't even do them. What face do you have to question me? Nonsense? I think you are the ones who are ignorant. In my opinion, you are a group of primitive people surrounding a leaf. Do you know what primitive means? It was the state of eating raw meat and drinking blood before humans could use flames. You faced an enemy of the past and thought that you could not defeat it, so you begged for your lives. However, we have already reached a point that you could not even imagine. At this moment, Ren Baqin was in the zone again. He was either proud, regretful, pitiful, or disdainful. He had created the image of a visitor from an advanced civilization and was looking down on the natives who were just eating and waiting to die. With Ren Baqin's reprimand, Wen Xiaoxing's face alternated between green and white. Finally he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was deathly pale as he staggered out the door. Vomiting blood? Does this person have a fragile heart? Rinpoche touched his bald head. He was obviously surprised by the power of his words. However, his sudden inspiration was not bad. No matter who was behind the other party, they would not easily make a move on him. Even if there was a hidden foreign race behind them, they would definitely find a way to find out the location and strength of the country he made up. If they were really just a bunch of brainless humans, it would be even easier to deal with them. Playing the role of a visitor from a highly civilized country that had developed for thousands of years was much more effective than playing the role of a snake or scorpion. In any case, he had so many things in his hands. Rinpoche touched his body. The grenades and sugar bags that were originally in his pocket had all been shaken off when Yun Yuhan grabbed them. After all, his reputation as a poison warrior was quite intimidating. However, it didn't matter. There were too many things that he could prove. Back then, he had always been afraid of letting others know that he was a visitor from a foreign land. Unexpectedly, he now had to work hard to make people believe that he was a visitor from a foreign land. Next, it would depend on the effect of the 10 million word outline that he had just boasted. Not long after, Rinpoche felt his vision darken. A person appeared in front of him and stared at him. It was Yun Yuhan. What did you do to Wen Shaoxing? There was no anger in Yun Yuhan's eyes but deep doubt. I just told him some big truths. Rinpoche spread his hands. Do you want to hear it? Not interested. As for you, your life is in my hands now. You are a smart person, so you'd better behave. Yun Yuhan said slowly. Her voice was very charming and soft, but there was a chill in it. Don't worry. I'll wait for you to send me back. Rinpoche chuckled. Bah. If you die, I will send your head back and bury it with Qi Zixiao. Luo Qiu shouted. Yun Yuhan laughed. Rinpoche's smile didn't change. There was a flame burning in his heart that wanted to burn the person in front of him to ashes. It's still too early to shout about killing. I'm curious about something. Have you ever tasted a man? Do you want me to try? Han's finger moved along Rinpoche's cheek, neck, and finally reached Rinpoche's shoulder blade. Following which, Rinpoche felt a sharp pain coming from his shoulder blade. His opponent's finger had forcefully pierced into the lower part of his shoulder blade. The yang boosting technique had strengthened his skin, but this finger only caused him to exert a little more strength. After piercing a knuckle, Yun Yuhan pulled her finger out, put her face close to his shoulder blade, and gently licked his wound with her tongue. Rinpoche seemed to not feel the pain and smiled even more brilliantly. Do you know that there is a saying in our world called thorny roses? Roses are the most beautiful flowers, but they have thorns. If you want to pick a rose, you will always be pricked until you bleed. Thorny roses? Very interesting. Yun Yuhan licked the blood from Rinpoche's wound. The corner of her mouth was stained with some blood, and she looked even more coquettish. After Yun Yuhan left, Rinpoche walked to the mirror and looked at himself. There was a hole in his clothes, and inside the hole was a wound as thick as a finger. After Yun Yuhan licked it, the wound actually stopped bleeding. However, Rinpoche was a little worried that he wasn't poisoned. Yun Yuhan's fingernails were all highly toxic. Perhaps this was the reason why she licked it? Was her saliva detoxifying him? Or did she have the antidote in her mouth? He had to admit that this woman was simply crazy. If he had the chance, he would kill her first. In the evening, when Shaoxing appeared in front of Rinpoche again. His face was still a little pale, but it seemed that he was fine. Seeing the wound on Rinpoche's body, when Shaoxing frowned and then smiled at him. This kind of thing won't happen again. Rinpoche playfully asked, Is your status higher than hers? When Shaoxing shook his head. You will know this in the future. I can only tell you that this kind of thing won't happen again. I would like to hear you continue to talk about that continent. In fact, when Shaoxing was already 30% convinced. After all, some things could be seen. Judging from some of the aspects that Rinpoche had shown, Rinpoche was indeed not from the Yun nation, Great Xia, or the Qin nation. In that case, what he said was very likely true. Although Rinpoche was exaggerating, when Shaoxing felt that it didn't seem like a lie. Rinpoche smiled and sat there, telling him how the human race arrived on the continent of Valoran, gained a foothold on the coast of Dalmatia, fought for the next piece of land from the natives, defeated Galen, the goddess of Dalmatia, Lux, and finally unified the entire continent of Valoran. After that, the human race also developed rapidly. While they were exploring the surrounding waters, they encountered the Zerg and the Protoss, who called themselves the Protoss, and a war broke out between the three parties. In the end, the human race used nuclear weapons to destroy the Protoss Templars and won the war. However, after that, the human race discovered that the Protoss race was a race that had been driven out of One Piece, which contained a huge secret of this world. Therefore, the entire human race began the age of discovery and searched for the legendary One Piece. Looking at Wen Shaoxing, who was listening attentively, Ren Baqin felt that he was really a web novelist who had been delayed. What you see is only a small part of this world. Ren Baqin stretched out his pinky and gestured. After Ren Baqin finished speaking, Wen Shaoxing was in a daze. What Ren Baqin said was too exaggerated. However, it was too real. The Protoss Templars, Dark Templars, Dragon Knights, Consul, Marauders, Observers, the Zerglings, Hydralisks, King Zergs, Lurkers, Wyverns, Queen Zergs. Ren Baqin's description of the abilities and appearances of these things that he had never heard of before was too realistic. It was as if they existed in this world. The human race had really encountered such enemies before. Otherwise, there was no way to create two such realistic races in such a short period of time. Not to mention the natives of the continent of Valoran. If he hadn't experienced it himself, it would have been hard for Wen Shaoxing to believe that someone could weave such a truthful lie in such a short period of time. In his heart, the truthfulness of Ren Baqin's words had risen from 30% to 70%. Let me set a small goal first. Remember Zinbei. Chapter 945. Wen Shaoxing sat there for a long time without saying a word. His expression was very interesting. In the end, he left without saying a word. He went back to reorganize the incredible things he had heard today. In his heart, there was also a little yearning. There was another group of humans in the past? To this extent? Compared to them, they should really be ashamed. He just couldn't figure it out. They were all humans, so what kind of fortuitous encounters did they have? How did they reach their current level? That night, Ren Baqin slept well. After realizing that his life was not in danger for the time being, he let go of his worries. The only thing that worried him was the Empress. He had to find a way to contact her. However, Wen Shaoxing hardly fell asleep. He spent the whole night thinking about the things that Ren Baqin had described, and images formed in his mind. The next morning, Ren Baqin was moved again. This time, not only Yun Yuhan but also Wen Shaoxing left with him. In this stronghold, the two of them should be the ones with the highest positions. Wen Shaoxing originally had other things to do, but what Ren Baqin said was so important that it would even affect the future direction of their organization. As such, their original plans had to be temporarily postponed. Before he set off, he probed, "Send someone to inform Qi Zixiao that I'm fine." Although it was a probing question, his tone was unquestionable. After all, this was befitting of his current identity. A strange smile appeared on Yun Yuhan's face. She gently stroked Ren Baqin's face with her fingers. It was cold to the touch, but it was charming and gentle to the touch. Ahem. Wen Shaoxing gave a dry cough and glanced at Yuhan. Yuhan curled her lips and retracted her hand. "It's not up to me to decide how to treat you." The meaning was obvious. If you can't even keep your life in the end, then there's no point in informing Qi Zixiao. If you can really move the others, then we'll talk about informing Qi Zixiao. Maybe we don't even need to inform Qi Zixiao and we can just let you go. Ren Baqin smiled mockingly and asked, "Do you have any other choice? Curl up here and be a maggot for the rest of your life?" Wen Shaoxing's eyes darkened and he stopped talking. Yun Yuhan glanced at Ren Baqin with a strange look. She was now curious about what Ren Baqin had said to Wen Shaoxing last night that made Ren Baqin dare to speak in such a tone and Wen Shaoxing's reaction. This journey took a full day and they still relied on their feet. The speed of a spirit wheel expert was far faster than that of an ordinary mount. However, their speed was slower than before because Wen Shaoxing was slower than Yun Yuhan, who was carrying Ren Baqin. The direction was northeast. Ren Baqin had a bad feeling about this. If they headed northeast, they would be at the seaside. If it was by the sea, it would still be fine. However, if it was on a small island in the East Sea of Great Xia, no one would be able to respond to his cries. He did not dare to place all his hopes on convincing the other party. From morning to night, it took them almost 14 hours to travel more than 1,600 li. They finally arrived at a fishing village by the sea. He wondered if the organization behind the scenes in this world had the same aesthetic standards and liked to stay in the village. For example, when they were in Tianjing Basin or now. The fishing village was not small, and from the looks of it, there were at least a few hundred families. In this era, it was considered a very big village. At this time, a population of 10,000 was considered a medium-sized city. Towns generally only had a population of 2,000. The ground in the village was paved with bluestone, and there were tall trees full of white flowers planted around it. In particular, there was a tree at the head of the village that was nearly 30 meters tall. Its branches and leaves were lush, and its spreading shade covered the 7 or 8 houses around it. There were many pedestrians coming and going in the village. There were children running and jumping barefoot on the bluestone road, and there were also fishermen wearing coarse clothes and dragging fishing nets whose skin had turned black and red from the sun. When they saw Wen Shaoxing and Yun Yuhan, everyone saluted them from afar. Ren Baqin observed carefully and found that 35% of the people he saw along the way were ordinary people, 50% were man-wheel experts, and half were earth-wheel experts. The ratio could be said to be astonishing. However, after thinking about it, this was the lair of an organization, so it was very normal. In addition, there were blacksmiths, grocery stores, cloth shops, and tea houses in the village. It could be said that this was a shrunken town. Ren Baqin was locked up in a courtyard in the west of the village. Yun Yuhan remained here to guard him while Wen Shaoxing left in a hurry. In a village, an old woman and 2 old men sat above. The old woman sat in the main seat, and the other 2 sat below her to her right. Wen Shaoxing respectfully told the 3 of them what Ren Baqin had said to him. Following Wen Shaoxing's words, the 2 old men's faces were full of bewilderment. In fact, Wen Shaoxing's retelling wasn't as complete as Ren Baqin's, so the effect was much worse. "This is ridiculous." One of the old men couldn't help but reprimand him. "It's indeed ridiculous." A cold light flashed in the old woman's eyes. "I'm a little interested." The last old man showed a strange smile. "If what he said is true, then a lot of things can be explained. Hall Master, 2 Deputy Hall Masters, I feel that his words are trustworthy. That's why I brought him back to the hall. There are some things in Dayo that really can't be explained, especially the weapons that appeared in the war against Great Xia and Tianjin Basin, which we have never seen before. After that, we collected some fragments and did find a problem. Those things don't have any traces of being handmade. Also, the long-distance communication that he mentioned should also exist. We didn't think of it before, but now, combined with what he said, the precise mobilization and cooperation of the Dayo army in these wars can be explained." "What do you mean by bringing him back?" the old woman asked with a cold face. "Summon all the deputy chiefs and above to decide our future." Wen Shaoxing lowered his head and said respectfully, "How dare you? Who do you think you are, Wen Shaoxing?" The old man who reprimanded him earlier shouted angrily, "Of course, I'm a member of the Temple of Heaven. I don't think there's anything wrong with this proposal. If what he said is true, then we are really frogs in a well and everything we have done has become a joke." "Grandmaster, do you think those nonsense dream talk are true?" the old woman asked with a cold face. "Maybe it's true, maybe it's false. Either way, this is a big deal. If what he said is true, then it won't just affect us but the entire human race. Have the 2 of you forgotten what the purpose of the Temple of Heaven is? Such an important matter, of course, must be decided by everyone. To be honest, I hope that what he said is true, but I don't know why the 2 of you have such a big reaction." The old man who was called Chief smiled. "I just think that it's complete nonsense and not credible. It's ridiculous to put aside all other matters and summon all the deputy chiefs just for this nonsense." The old man who reprimanded him earlier said resentfully, "What if what he said is true? What if he can produce evidence? That kid is full of doubts, so it's better not to make a decision too quickly," Chief said with a smile. The momentum of the other 2 suddenly stagnated. "Why don't we gather all the honored ones first and decide whether to summon all the deputy chiefs back immediately? This matter involves the future of the entire human race. Since ancient times, the Temple of Heaven has been watching the changes in the world with cold eyes. What we do is to protect the human race. This is a righteous cause. In other words, the Temple of Heaven is not a temple for one person or one sect, but for everyone. Now that something that can affect the future of the entire human race has appeared, it's natural for everyone to make a decision together," Chief repeated. The old woman stared at him a few times and let out a long sigh. "You're right. This matter needs to be decided by everyone. Ring the heavenly bell and summon all the honored ones to discuss together. Old friend, set a small goal first." Chapter 946. Ren Baqin was resting in the house, wondering how he could find an opportunity to contact the Empress. At this moment, he heard the sound of a bell coming from the center of the village. Yun Yuhan, who was leaning against the door, changed her expression slightly. "It's the 12th ring. All the venerables are coming out of seclusion. They actually value you so much." Ren Baqin opened his eyes and smiled. "Yesterday I asked you if you wanted to know what I said to Wen Shaoxing. It's too late for you to know now. Yun Yuhan walked over to Ren Baqin and said, "How can it be too late? Unless you don't want to say." Ren Baqin stroked her face with his finger. "I really don't have any interest in talking about it now." Yun Yuhan's arm moved and then stopped. Her palm stopped a few centimeters away from Ren Baqin's face, and he could feel the wind from her palm. "Don't be so impatient. It won't look good if your face is swollen." Ren Baqin smiled and pushed her hand away. "Umph." Yun Yuhan twisted her body and walked back to lean against the door frame. Ren Baqin didn't know what Wen Shaoxing said to her, but it did have some effect. 2 hours later, when Shaoxing returned and said, "Come with me. The temple chief and the venerables want to see you." Ren Baqin nodded, tidied up his clothes, got up and walked out with Wen Shaoxing. The speed of the other party was unexpectedly fast, which showed that they valued him a lot. This gave him a lot of confidence. "What's the name of your organization?" Ren Baqin asked casually on the way. "Temple of Heaven." Probably because there was no need to hide his identity now, when Shaoxing spoke frankly. "What are venerables?" "The abdicated temple chief will become venerables." Ren Baqin nodded. "Temple chief, venerables, temple chief." It seemed that the other party did have a lot of experts. "Are you a temple chief?" "Yes." During the 10-minute journey, Ren Baqin got a lot of information from Wen Shaoxing. It seemed that Wen Shaoxing no longer hid anything after arriving at their lair. This organization was called the Temple of Heaven. It was said that a group of people formed it after the human race retreated here. Its purpose was to protect the human race. However, some things happened later. Some people discovered that not only did the human race not recover their strength, but they were also constantly weakening. From then on, the Temple of Heaven knew that if there were no major changes, the human race wouldn't be able to leave the land of exile. From then on, the Temple of Heaven had another task, which was to ensure that no one left the land of exile. The Temple of Heaven was divided into 8 subhalls, with about 10,000 people. The other party didn't mention the number of venerables, but Su Wuming was one of them. The so-called Temple of Heaven was not above ground, but underground. There was a sea god temple at the back of the village. From the back of the sea god temple, there was a passage that led diagonally down a few hundred steps. Then there was a passage lined with oil lamps on both sides. After walking for a few hundred meters, they finally arrived at a huge space. Dozens of tall statues were situated in this space, forming a circle. Each statue was 10 meters tall. They were either holding a book, a long sword, or a spear. Each statue was like a fierce warrior who fought against the heavens and earth, inspiring respect. Ren Baqin counted silently. There were a total of 42 statues. 17 of the statues had a person sitting on their shoulders. There were both men and women, and almost all of them were elderly. These people were the venerables and deputy temple masters of the Temple of Heaven. In other words, there were at least 14 venerables in the Temple of Heaven. He wondered if Su Wuming was among them. When Shaoxing brought Ren Baqin to the center of the hall, bowed to the statues in front of him and said, "Temple Master, Deputy Temple Master, Venerables, I have brought him here. Go back to your seat." The voice of an old woman was heard. When Shaoxing moved, landed on one of the shoulders and sat down cross-legged. Ren Baqin looked at the tall statues in front of him. If he wanted to see everyone clearly, he had to look up. He then lowered his eyelids and chuckled. "Everyone, this isn't the way to treat a guest. I don't have the habit of looking up at others." "Kid, what did you say?" an old man asked. His voice was like a big bell that reverberated in this space, causing pain in the eardrums. There was also a kind of power that made people fearful. If it were someone else, they might really be in awe. However, Ren Baqin had been through the market of Dayo's imperial court and was immune to this kind of situation. In Dayo's imperial court, there were 2 things that needed to be done to suppress others. The louder the voice and the bigger the fist. Ren Baqin remained unmoved and said, "You need to maintain a minimum level of respect for a guest from another group of humans, a civilization that far surpasses yours, and a person who can bring you a future. You think that you control my life, but I control your future." Ren Baqin wasn't moved at all. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere in the hall immediately changed, and many of the venerables looked surprised. In fact, many people still didn't know what was going on. The bell rang 12 times, indicating that something important had happened and that everyone needed to make a decision together. This kind of thing was rare in the history of the Tiandao Alliance. The last time it happened was 100 years ago, when a group of warriors who were preparing to leave the land of exile were killed. Li Fu only knew that Su Wuming had killed a group of people. In fact, there were also venerables who went to eliminate the experts in other places. You are very bold, the old woman said. It's just a reasonable request. Rinpoche laughed and then raised his voice. Everyone, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Zhao, Prince Consort of Dayo. Of course, this is only a part of me. In addition, I'm a descendant of another group of humans who left the Lansang region. I'm a member of the League of Legends and the captain of the One Piece exploration team, Nico Robin. I need treatment that matches my identity. The air suddenly froze as Rinpoche spoke. The dozen or so venerables were shocked. With their cultivation and status, as well as their many years of experience, it could be said that nothing could make them lose their composure. However, after hearing Rinpoche's words, everyone couldn't keep calm. What did you say? It wasn't one person who spoke, but several people who questioned him at the same time. Rinpoche spread out his hands and asked, "Do you still want me to look up and talk to you? The 42 statues here are the 42 seniors who founded the Temple of Heaven back then." A gentle voice said. "So, it didn't stop you from stepping on them? Or do you want to come down?" Rinpoche smiled kindly. "How dare you?" An aura came pressing down from the sky like a mountain trying to suppress Rinpoche. Rinpoche smiled and wasn't moved at all. Another aura came from the sky and protected Rinpoche. "Ningyu Jiang, this isn't in line with how we treat our guests." "What kind of guest is he?" "He's just a kid full of nonsense." "Whether I'm full of nonsense or not isn't something you can decide alone." Rinpoche said at the right time, "Whether I'm talking nonsense or not, there will always be a way to prove it. Don't you even have the courage to face it? Or are some of you afraid of something?" "Ridiculous. Ningyu Jiang." After the old lady stopped Ningyu Jiang, she slowly said, "Each of these 42 statues represents an ancestor who founded the Temple of Heaven. The reason why we are standing here is that each of us has inherited the will of an ancestor. However, as you said, you are a very important guest. If what you said is proven to be true, then you naturally deserve to be treated with courtesy. If what you said is proven to be false, you definitely won't be able to bear our anger. Now I'll give you a choice. Do you still want to be treated in accordance with your status? I can tell you that if you are honest now, it's not too late." Rinpoche sneered in his heart. "Child's play. If I show my cowardice now, doesn't that mean that my words can't be trusted?" He immediately opened his mouth to speak, but at this moment, there was a slight tingling in the back of his head as if he had been bitten by something. Rinpoche opened his mouth, and his expression suddenly changed because he realized that he couldn't make a sound. The old lady in the distance looked at him mockingly. However, it was only for a moment before Rinpoche spoke again. "I want treatment in accordance with my status." The old lady's expression immediately changed. How was this possible? Did the soul worm fail? One had to know that the soul worm could transform between real and fake, enter the sea of knowledge of others and control their consciousness. It was an extremely precious thing in the world. It didn't exist in this land of exile at all. Out of the 3 that were left behind, only 1 remained after so many years. This was an important matter, so she took it out to use, but it actually failed? At this moment, on a planet in Rinpoche's Sea of Knowledge, a thumb-sized worm streaked across the sky like a gray line. Looking at the ocean, mountains, plains, forests, rivers, the worm's eyes were filled with confusion. "Where is this? Is this the sea of knowledge of a human? How can it be so big? Where is the pearl? I'm lost." Set a small goal first, such as, "Remember in 1 second. Shukju Mobile. Chapter 947. Choking with Sobs. Novel. The old woman thought that she could control him, but she didn't expect that she would fail. This made her a little absent-minded. Because she was too confident in the soul worm, she did not prepare any backup plans. On the other hand, Rinpoche didn't know that he had escaped a calamity. After realizing that he was fine, he relaxed. "I demand treatment befitting of my status." Rinpoche looked straight ahead and said faintly. He didn't look at anyone and just calmly scanned the setups in his line of sight. He didn't want to raise his head to look at others. Although he didn't have such a taboo and didn't have such an arrogant ego, he needed it at this moment. "Give him a spot." The old woman came back to her senses. Her expression was unsightly, but she still had to control herself so that others wouldn't notice anything unusual. She looked around the hall and realized that it was too late to arrange a seat for Rinpoche. As such, she could only use the statues in the hall. "The deputy hall master of the Birdine Hall is dead. You can speak from there." Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. When Shaoxing pointed to the side and said, "Here," it was at the outermost part of the hall. If the 46 statues were said to have a higher status as they moved inwards, then when Xiaoxing's and Rinpoche's statues were located on both sides of the door, they were also the two statues with the lowest status. However, the height was the same. Rinpoche climbed up the statue with his legs and arms. He exerted quite a bit of strength under his feet. This statue was indeed very sturdy. He didn't even manage to step on a single piece of gravel. "Are you the chief of Kain Temple?" Rinpoche asked Wen Xiaoxing. "Yes." Wen Xiaoxing closed his eyes and responded lightly. Wen Xiaoxing was the chief of Kain Temple and had appeared in the Yun Nation. It seemed like Kain Temple was in charge of a part of the Yun Nation. As for the Vice Hall Master, he didn't know if he died at the hands of Vice Protector General Wu Kai or the two commandants. However, this was as far as he could go. He hadn't protected himself yet, so it wasn't time to dig up the past. Rinpoche looked up at the people in front of him and started to taunt them. "I am shocked by your depravity and incompetence." The moment he said that, the others were instantly enraged. As members of the Heavenly Law Union's upper echelons, when had they ever been ridiculed like this? A powerful aura lingered in the sky above the hall. It was as if a huge wave would crash down at any time, smashing Rinpoche's body into pieces. "Let me reintroduce myself. I come from another branch of the human race. It was an accident that allowed me to discover you." Rinpoche ignored the auras and continued speaking. The aura in the air suddenly stagnated. "You came from another human race? What proof do you have? Where is the other branch of the human race? How did you get here? How many people do you have?" For the crowd, they could put aside their previous disrespect and even pretend that they didn't hear it. These were the things they desperately wanted to know. Of course there is evidence. In fact, you can already guess a thing or two from the new weapons that appeared during the war between Dayo Great Xia and Tianjin Basin. There's also Dayo's long-distance communication technology. Without the need for carrier pigeons, they can speak from thousands of kilometers away. Not to mention there were also steam cars, forging machines and other new production processes. But it seems like you guys are very ill-informed. Or as I said before, weakness and ignorance have limited your imagination. Rinpoche continued to mock them mercilessly. Of course, it's actually very easy for you to see the evidence. Unfortunately, when I stepped into the trap, your people threw away all the things I had on me. Otherwise, I would be able to prove it now. In the end, you still can't prove it, someone said in a deep voice. No. You don't know what quantum transmission is. In fact, you don't even know what quantum is. However, this technology isn't perfect at the moment, and it takes some time for a round trip. That's why I'm talking to you first. I don't know what you're talking about, but you have to prove that what you said is true first. There's another branch of the human race in this world, and you are also from there, the old woman in the center said with a cold look in her eyes. It seems like, you really want to prove that everything I said is false? Rinpoche asked with a faint smile. Logically speaking, as a member of the human race, you should feel happy and excited to hear this news, but your reaction seems a little strange? The old woman's face turned cold. After all, what you said is too unbelievable and we have to be cautious. Being cautious doesn't mean denying it. Rinpoche said non-committally. Everyone here can tell whether what I said is true or not, right? I always thought that being able to live to this age you wouldn't be living like a dog. Even if you aren't smart, you can still tell whether a person's words are true or not. Furthermore, you will always have the opportunity to verify it. Did you lose anything before we verified the authenticity of the information? Rinpoche's words made everyone frown and their blood surge. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with what he said, but his words were really too unpleasant. They couldn't help but want to slap him to death. Rinpoche sneered in his heart. Sometimes people were so cheap. The more polite you were, the more they felt that you had something to ask of them and the more untrustworthy you were. The more you despised them and trampled on them, the more they felt that your words were trustworthy. In particular, he had to play the role of these people. Back then, the human race retreated step by step and you retreated to this land of exile. The foreign races also focused their attention on you. In addition to you, there was another group of people in hiding. There weren't many experts among them, so they didn't attract much attention. Everyone nodded. According to some of the information that had been passed down, the battle was very fierce. In a short period of time, both sides suffered great losses. The human race began to retreat, while the foreign races pressed in wave after wave. Under such circumstances, it was normal for some survivors to wander outside and not be noticed. Although the foreign races were powerful, they weren't large in number. After the foreign races chased the human race to the land of exile, they would return to deal with the survivors. Our ancestors also knew that what awaited them in the end was destruction. It just so happened that they weren't far from the sea, so they built some wooden boats and went out to sea to hide. They first arrived at some islands and stayed there for a few days to reinforce the hastily made boats. Then they went all the way east. Along the way they went through many hardships, fought against the heavens, and finally arrived at the chaotic Star Sea with a little bit of luck. Tens of thousands of people set out, but only half of them made it to the chaotic Star Sea. What kind of place is the chaotic Star Sea? Someone asked after listening to Ren Qian. The chaotic Star Sea is a place where humans and foreign races mix. In fact, some people arrived there long before that and left behind descendants, Ren Qian continued. With the help of a senior named Han Pao Pao in the chaotic Star Sea, many of our ancestors recuperated there for several years. However, as its name suggests, the chaotic Star Sea is too chaotic. There are many forces and killing is common. During this period, someone accidentally obtained a sea map to the continent of Valoran. Finally, some people decided to set out again to find their legendary new home. Ren Qian added, "This is the beginning of the rise of another branch of the human race." Rise. Everyone repeated this word. If what Ren Qian said was true, then the number of humans who came to the land of exile was even smaller. Now that thousands of years had passed, had the human race in the land of exile risen? No. Although the population had increased by 10,000 times, the overall strength of the human race was probably inferior to the original tens of thousands of people. They really couldn't imagine what Ren Qian meant by rise. What was the current branch of the human race like? Only when Shaoxing was looking forward to it. After all, the feeling of being stabbed in the heart several times and beginning to doubt life couldn't be enjoyed by only himself. It was truly good for everyone. Furthermore, he really wanted to see their expressions in a while. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 948. Novel Yes Rise. Ren Qian repeated. Do you know what's the biggest difference between us and you? Ren Qian asked. Do you know what's the biggest difference between us and you? You're willing to hide in a corner and even bind yourselves for fear of bringing disaster upon yourselves. You even regard this as your responsibility and goal. Ridiculous. Let me ask you this, are you willing? Is this what you thought when you joined the Temple of Heaven? Is this what you wish for? For thousands of years, this has been the case for generations. Are you willing before you die? No. Although I don't know you, I can say that everyone wants to see the vast world outside. No one likes to be imprisoned in a cage. Enough. You don't understand our situation at all. This is the land of exile and there's no hope of recovery here. Someone shouted angrily. Ren Qian chuckled to himself. These words placed him outside the group of people from the land of exile. In other words, regardless of whether the other party had made a mistake, his attitude and interrogation had worked. This is the land of exile, but the outside world isn't. Ren Qian said faintly. Since you're waiting to die of old age here, why don't you fight to the death and find another way to go overseas? You might have gained something after thousands of years. Do you think we haven't done it? Although I don't know how you passed through the turbulence layer, how many lives have we lost over the years? So you gave up? Ren Qian's heart skipped a beat. The turbulence layer, as the name suggested, should be an ocean with a lot of turbulence. However, to be able to stop so many experts, there should be other reasons besides the turbulence. Do you think our survival fell from the sky? It's undeniable that luck did play a role in our arrival in the chaotic Star Sea. However, how many times have we passed since then? It was all achieved through the concerted efforts of everyone. When has the human race ever been strong? Whether it was in the Lansong territory, the chaotic Star Sea, or even the Zerg in the Protoss, we were always at a disadvantage. The human race is a weak race. Ren Qian announced loudly. Other races are born at the man-wheel level or even earth-wheel level. The entire race can communicate directly with each other through telepathy or maximize the use of allocated resources in exchange for the strength of the entire race. Even the most common vicious beast could learn to run within a month or two of birth, and could learn to hunt within half a year. Only the human race had a low starting point, slow growth, and weak talent. Could be said that they had nothing. Greed, jealousy, laziness, internal strife, and all sorts of other evil deeds are not lacking. Following Ren Qian's words, some people were deep in thought while others looked angry. They had to admit that what Ren Qian said was right. Even if he wanted to refute, he couldn't say anything. More importantly, everyone wanted to hear what Rinpoche had to say. The smile on Rinpoche's face disappeared as he shouted at the top of his lungs. So what? Now that the Zergs and the Protoss have fallen, the Valoran continent is under the rule of the entire human race. We explore the 4 seas, we conquer the skies, we soar in the sky, we defeat powerful opponents, we explore the most fundamental mysteries of this world. This is what the weakest of humans can do. After Rinpoche shouted, he paid attention to everyone's expressions and aura. He realized that it wasn't as infectious as he had imagined. It seemed like there wasn't enough foreshadowing. Rinpoche reflected on himself. There was no other way. He had never done such a thing in his life and needed to arouse the emotions of others. He had no experience. However, it was still not too late. Rinpoche took 2 deep breaths to calm himself down. I hate the idea that all of you return everything to the land of exile and the turbulence. This is a form of cowardice and incompetence. You have to know that the world is there and we can't let it change for us. We have to change everything. Then he lowered his voice and continued, when our ancestors arrived at the Valoran continent from the chaotic Star Sea, it wasn't a fertile land. There were aboriginals, foreign races, and disputes. The entire human race only had a little more than 10,000 people. Furthermore, there were no experts. Rinpoche emphasized. Just like what I've said before, they're just a group of survivors who have been temporarily forgotten and thought to be irrelevant to the overall situation. There were no experts. The strongest among them was only at the Earthwheel level. They were inferior to you. Everyone was surprised to hear this. No experts. How did they survive then? Putting everything else aside, just the huge beasts in the sea alone could easily destroy tens of thousands of people. However, the fact is that we survived. Rinpoche smiled. Not only did we survive, but we also became stronger and stronger. Of course, we were like you at the beginning and hid in a corner. The first thing we had to do was to survive. While surviving, we constantly thought of ways to understand everything about that continent and adapt to its rules. The most important thing was war and technology. War made us fearless of bloodshed and united. War made us strong, made us progress, made us suffer, and sublimated our spirits. War and struggle are the most beautiful gestures of human beings. If war is a gesture, then technology is the foundation of everything. The development of technology has enriched our supplies. Technology allows us to become stronger without any strong individual strength. Cold weapons, firearms, explosives, cannons, tanks, fighter jets, bombers, warships, aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons. Rinpoche spoke quickly and kept throwing out nouns that no one had ever heard of. He didn't need to explain to everyone what these nouns meant. He just needed to make them feel that they didn't understand. We are on a completely different path from you. We don't have experts or the strong, and we don't have the glory of the past. We have to rely on ourselves and these technologies to defeat powerful enemies. Rinpoche took a deep breath and began to tell everyone about the most important war that lasted for 100 years, the Battle of Summoner's Canyon. It praised the heroes who made outstanding contributions: Yingzheng, Bai Qi, Lu Bang, Xiangyu, Wang Jian, Liu Bei, Cao Cao, Guanyu, Zhang Fei, Zhang Shutua, Su Xiling, Ko Zhong, Yuan Huaji, Shan Xiongxin. He also listed the heroes of the foreign races on the continent of Valoran. He also listed some key battles such as the Battle of Hulao Pass and the Battle of Guandu. The former was basically the Qin dynasty, the Three Kingdoms, and the Sui and Tang dynasties. The Sui and Tang dynasties were even magically modified, the twin dragons of the Tang dynasty. Every name of these people is remembered by every descendant. They didn't have the strength of you. They might not be strong, but they all made outstanding contributions in that 100-year war. They were the first batch of achievers of the League of Legends. It was to commemorate the heroes in the war that the League of Legends was established. Rinpoche didn't forget that he was a member of the League of Legends. He conveniently raised the level of the League of Legends by several levels. It was during that century-long war that our technology began to develop rapidly. New technologies and equipment began to appear, and the entire human race also underwent tremendous changes. Telephones, television, computers, numerically controlled machine tools, energy technology, material technology, biotechnology, information technology, and even breeding technology, agricultural technology, production technology, and new technologies were constantly being developed. Although the human race was at war, their strength was accumulating little by little. After that war, we spent hundreds of years to truly unify the continent of Valoran. After a period of settlement and development, we began to explore this world. At that time we were already strong enough until we met the Zerg and the Protoss. Leyland said. Rinpoche took a deep breath and began to tell everyone about the second crucial battle in the development of the human race. The battle between the three races. It was also known as the battle for supremacy. At this point, the doubts in everyone's hearts decreased. It couldn't be helped since Rinpoche's narration was too detailed. He could tell the details of every person in every war. The logic was complete and there were almost no omissions. In fact, at this time, some omissions were normal. After all, no one could remember in such detail. The most important thing was that they couldn't find any loopholes in the narration of history. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 949. Compared to the foreign races of Valoran, the Zerg and the Protoss, who had different forms and abilities as well as completely different life forms and social structures, were the real enemies. This was an arduous war that lasted for thousands of years. During the most tragic times, the blood of millions of soldiers stained the creep of the Zerg in a single battle. Everyone was shocked by this number. Following Rinpoche's narration, everyone could imagine the tragedy of that war. Countless human warriors charged into the bunkers and the arachnid base, which was guarded by the earth spikes. Countless fighter jets took off to fight against the Zerg wyverns and queens, and countless sparks and blood bloomed in the air. At this time, everyone understood something. For example, firearms were like crossbows, but they were more powerful, had a longer range, and were easier and faster to control. For example, a tank seemed to be a vehicle completely wrapped in iron, and the most important thing was the cannon on top of the tank. For example, an airplane was a tool that could carry people, fly, and attack. If it weren't for Rinpoche's narration, they wouldn't have imagined that such a thing existed in the world. Rinpoche also described to them the huge enemy nation of the humans. With the improvement of medical standards, the birth rate of that batch of humans was higher, and their survival cycle was longer. With the development of technology and abundance of supplies, the number of members in a family was much higher than in Great Xia. Since they mainly controlled these weapons in battle, ordinary people could go into battle after training. As a result, even though there was a bloody war that lasted for thousands of years, they survived by quickly replenishing their population and training their combat power. In the end, by relying on the unified allocation of supplies and tenacity of the entire human race, they defeated the so-called Zerg and the Protoss with great difficulty, won the war between the three races and became the final king. When Rinpoche talked about how the humans had used nuclear bombs to blow up the last base of the Protoss and the remaining troops, everyone felt a surge of excitement in their hearts. They wanted to shout out loud and cheer for the blood-soaked achievements of these humans. Although they were the top combat power of the Temple of Heaven, although they were all used to seeing the wind and clouds, and although they all looked old and senile, they were once young and hot-blooded. After hearing about the deeds of the other branch of the human race, the blood in their hearts that had not yet disappeared was reignited. Good. Let's celebrate. Someone patted the statue under his seat and praised loudly. It was a burly man with a beard that resembled the scene of an explosion. At this moment, his eyes were turbid and filled with a sharpness that was stimulated. His face was full of praise. Even though his beard and hair were all white and his face was full of wrinkles, he had a tall stature and was only slightly smaller than the aboriginals. His back was straight like a spear and his voice was like a loud bell. It could be seen that this person used to be extraordinarily mighty. Of course, after this praise, Rinpoche felt that he wasn't too bad either. He was keenly aware of the change in the atmosphere in the hall. When he saw the admiration in everyone's eyes, he knew that the time had come. Putting the latter part of the story aside, he said, "War, blood and fire, survival and death, evolution and elimination, these are the main themes of our race and also the main themes of every race. Everyone is afraid of death, this is the instinct of life. But we do not resist death. Therefore we are not averse to war. In this world, only by fighting could one obtain a slim chance of survival. If one remained stagnant and holed up in a corner of the world to seek perfection, what awaited them would ultimately be destruction. Look at you, don't you look like cattle and sheep in a pen? What's even more laughable is that you've become shepherds and raised yourselves in pens." Rinpoche mercilessly pulled everyone back to reality. Those foreign races just feel that you are no longer a threat, so they will ignore you for the time being. If they remember one day, this place will become their playground. All of you, as well as your descendants, will become their toys. Toys that they can take as they please. You don't have the courage or the ability to resist. In fact, you will even become their accomplices. You want to say no? But isn't that what you are doing now? Now, you are using the survival of the human race as a reason to eliminate the foreign races. In the future, won't you use the survival of the human race as a reason to make people willingly become their puppets? You are their accomplices. Ren Baqin directly interrupted what the other party wanted to say and angrily rebuked them. However, you are lucky to have met me. You don't have to be like the people before you, living a life of self-confinement and self-degradation from birth to death. I will let you at least have a little hope in life. I will let you still have a chance to see the sky outside. I will let you still have the courage to muster what little courage you have left. I will let you have the courage to say loudly that you are a human. Enough. The old woman loudly interrupted Ren Baqin's words with a trembling voice. Ren Baqin was surprised to hear another feeling in her voice: fear. That's right, fear. What was she afraid of? Was she afraid of his words? Or was she afraid of something else? Ren Baqin paid attention. Just now, when everyone was excited, the old woman's expression was a little strange. Although she was too far away to see what her expression contained, it was different from the others. How can you prove that everything you say is true and not nonsense? Prove this first and then we will talk about other things. The old woman panted a few times and said. As soon as she said this, the hall quieted down again. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Ren Baqin. Most of them believed Ren Baqin's words. This was because there would always be various loopholes in a fabricated story. However, there weren't any in Ren Baqin's words. Ren Baqin's story was too detailed and too real. It was so real that everyone seemed to be able to see and touch it with their own eyes. They could feel that the entire human race was united as a rope and worked hard for the same goal. Each and every soldier was willing to sacrifice life and death for the same goal. There was only one word in everyone's heart: for humanity. The appeal of Ren Baqin's story was so strong that they couldn't imagine that what he said was false. Or rather, they didn't want to believe it. Just as Ren Baqin said, this was their chance. However, at this time, everyone was still silent and waiting to see Ren Baqin's proof. Some of them had their eyes flickering, and they made up their minds to protect him even if he couldn't produce proof now. Proof? Do you really think that you have captured me? Ren Baqin suddenly laughed. Initially, I just wanted to find the mastermind behind the scenes. Now I just want to talk to you. I want you to understand that you are walking on the wrong path without knowing it. I have to say that I'm actually quite kind-hearted. Seeing that you humans have fallen so far, I'm still trying to save you. Now that you want to see the proof. Do you remember the quantum transmission technology that I mentioned before? This is one of the technologies that we obtained from the Protoss. First of all, you have to know what quantum is. Everything in the world is made up of tiny particles, from mountains to water droplets. They are all made up of countless tiny particles. Each of us is also made up of these tiny particles. Everyone nodded slightly. In fact, they had also realized what Ren Baqin said, but they couldn't express it as clearly as Ren Baqin did. These tiny particles are actually made up of even smaller particles. These particles are atoms, electrons, photons, and so on. Quantum is a general term for subatomic particles. Quantum transmission is the transmission of quantum particles from one point to another. Remember what I just said. We humans are also made up of tiny particles. You mean? Everyone pondered over Ren Baqin's words. Although they didn't understand the specifics, they understood the meaning behind his words. Everyone's faces were instantly filled with shock. This technology currently has a little flaw. After a transmission, it takes a few hours to recover before it can be transmitted again. Also, don't come close to me. I don't want to transmit a part of your body to another place. I don't think you want to try half of your body suddenly appearing on the other side of the world. Ren Baqin chuckled. As he spoke, the air around him fluctuated. Then, everyone watched helplessly as he disappeared just like that. No, he's not in the hall, someone said with a surprised look on his face. When Xiaoxing bowed to everyone and rushed out of the hall. After 15 minutes, he came back with a shocked look on his face. Not even within a radius of 5 kilometers. He had always thought that Ren Baqin's life and death were under his control. Not only him but everyone present felt the same way. However, at this time, everyone realized that Ren Baqin really just wanted to stay and say a few words just as he said. Everyone in the hall fell silent, and their faces could no longer remain calm. Over the past 100 years, everyone's emotions had fluctuated as much as today. Sure enough, Ren Baqin came from the outside. What the other party had said was indeed true. Would he come back? He said that it will take a few hours to recover before he can be transmitted again. Everyone wait here for a while. We should also discuss what to do in the future. The voice of a gentle old man came into everyone's ears. It was the deputy temple master, Zhongshang. Is there anything else to discuss? The tall man who had previously praised Zhongshang sneered. Chief, what do you say? Zhongshang didn't care at all and looked at the old woman with a smile. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 950. Rinpoche returned to Earth, walked to the window and looked at the city below. After a long time he let out a long sigh. He wasn't very nervous when he was speaking. However, after returning, the state of being fully immersed in the story subsided, and he felt waves of fatigue. Facing more than a dozen top experts who could easily kill him with their fingers and using words to shake their minds, Rinpoche really didn't want to experience such an experience again. Although he had countless stories from Earth in his mind, it wasn't easy to put them together without exposing any logical problems. He had to remember almost every word that was said and not give himself away in his subsequent words. Fortunately, it seemed like he had succeeded. What Rinpoche was most afraid of was that someone would get close to him at that moment. Although he was dozens of meters away from those honorable experts, this wasn't a problem for them. Not to mention there was Wen Shaoxing beside him. If that really happened and they found out that he came from this world without any martial arts, he would really be done for. Fortunately, this situation didn't happen. At this point, the rest of the matter was almost logical. This incident was a daunting experience without any mishaps, and the rewards were great. With this group of people, it would be easier to integrate all the experts of the human race. The only problem was killing Deputy Protector General Wu Kai, the 2 commandants and those patrolmen. The Empress wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Although the overall situation was important, revenge was more important to the Empress. She had always been a very tough and clear-cut person. Rinpoche always felt that the name Ren Wuxing was more suitable for her. After standing in front of the window for a while, Rinpoche took a shower and prepared some things. At the same time, he took the opportunity to understand the recent situation on Earth. Recently, the relationship between China and the United States had been a little tense. In fact, there used to be some friction between the two countries. Since China took over the position of the #1 economic power a few years ago, this kind of friction not only didn't decrease, but also appeared in various fields. It wasn't until the appearance of the unknown martial arts that the attitude of the Western countries, media, and people changed. Many of the allies of the United States hesitated for a while before letting go of their reservations and taking the initiative to come over. Not only that, but the number of ordinary people applying for immigration had also gradually increased. However, there had been some changes recently. The city exoskeleton system had reached the point where it could be used on the battlefield, and it had begun to be equipped with small-scale troops. To put it simply, this simple alloy shell was faster, stronger, and more accurate. Coupled with the artificial intelligence system and the basic techniques obtained from China, the individual strength of the U.S. military had increased significantly. This was the source of their confidence. Even some of America's allies began to change their stance. For these guys, technology, which was something that could be seen and touched and could be controlled, was obviously easier to understand and have confidence in than something that was hard to estimate. The news that Rinpoche received later confirmed this point. It was said that some of the Earthwheel experts from the military had been transferred to that chaotic continent. It seemed like both sides were going to wrestle there. On one hand, Rinpoche asked someone to monitor the situation there. On the other hand, he prepared his own things and even got someone to bring over a blonde Westerner. 2.5 days later he returned to that world without stopping. Rinpoche was wearing pajamas, sitting on a chair, and holding a plate of fragrant beef noodles in his hand. One of his feet was on a box next to him, and the other was stepping on a person. The light in front of him darkened, and he was transported from the floating villa on Earth to the underground hall. The sudden change in light made Rinpoche almost unable to see anything clearly. However, he wasn't surprised at all. He maintained the same posture with a calm expression until he gradually saw his surroundings clearly. Then he smiled and said, "Everyone, we meet again." In fact, everyone was more surprised than him. In fact, as time passed, everyone's hearts were always restless. After all, the other party had disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. This meant that the situation had completely changed from them holding the initiative to the other party. Although the other party said that he would come back, no one knew exactly when he would come back. It wasn't until the air changed and Rinpoche's silhouette appeared that everyone calmed down. However, after they calmed down and saw the state that Rinpoche was in, they had mixed feelings. This was because Rinpoche's state at this time was really too relaxed. It was as if he had just woken up at home and was eating breakfast. Meanwhile they were waiting anxiously here. Rinpoche naturally made such a posture on purpose. Sometimes, a posture could let others feel his attitude and also let them understand his position. Because the technology of quantum transmission isn't mature enough, I need some time to prepare. However, I came back a little earlier than I expected. Rinpoche smiled. Although Rinpoche said that the technology wasn't mature enough, it was enough to shock and astonish everyone. This was transferring a person out of thin air and back with other things. Looking at the box beside Rinpoche and the human-like object he was stepping on, everyone's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and their hearts burned with passion. Rinpoche also felt a little scared. It was because he had forgotten that the space on the statue's shoulders was limited. Although it was enough for one person and was even spacious, there was still a box and a person at his feet. It was a blessing that he didn't fall. Rinpoche felt that his luck was really good during this period of time. I've only eaten half of it. Do you mind? Rinpoche held the plate and gestured to everyone. He then lowered his head and continued to finish the plate of beef noodles before putting the plate on the statue's head. This is the Walleran people. We didn't kill them all, but absorbed the survivors into our ranks after our victory. Now we've brought them here to broaden your horizons. Rinpoche picked up the unconscious person at his feet and threw it to Wen Shaoxing. Wen Shaoxing took it and sized it up. It looked similar to a human, but its facial features and hair color were very strange. It wasn't an exaggeration to describe it as a demon. Wen Shaoxing clicked his tongue. This was the first time he had seen such a person. As for strength, it wasn't even comparable to an ordinary person, so there was nothing to be concerned about. Wen Shaoxing casually threw it to the others. A human body that weighed nearly 100 kilograms flew across a distance of dozens of meters in the air, and everyone looked like they were doing it with ease. Seeing such a strange person, everyone no longer doubted Rinpoche's words. I told you before that two people can communicate directly from thousands of kilometers away. Rinpoche opened the box, took out a radio station, turned on the power and adjusted the frequency. There was no other sound apart from the sound of the electric current. Rinpoche wondered if he had adjusted the frequency wrong or exceeded the range. How could Dayo's official chat group be so quiet? Especially since he was missing, shouldn't it be in full swing at this time? Is anyone there? Rinpoche asked tentatively. At the same time, he paid attention to the others from the corner of his eye to see if they would stop him. The good news was that everyone was attentively watching Rinpoche talk to that strange thing and pricked up their ears. Rinpoche adjusted the volume to the maximum and heard a surprised and incredulous voice from the radio station. Zhao? Zhao Prince Consort? Although the voice wasn't too loud, everyone had sharp ears and was in a closed space. They immediately heard the voice coming from the strange box and their eyes lit up. It's me. Rinpoche laughed. Quick, inform Her Majesty that there's news about Zhao Prince Consort. There was a panic on the other end of the radio station. Zhao Prince Consort, where are you? Weren't you captured? Ahem, I'm just here to chat with people about life and ideals. Rinpoche coughed dryly. Zhao Prince Consort, you are finally all right. This was Zhuoyu from the Protectorate of the Southeast. Ahem, you almost scared me to death. This was Li Qianxiu. Kid, where are you? This was Hongwu. You don't know, but Her Majesty is going crazy. After causing such a big mess, you won't be able to escape a beating when you return. This was Tong Xinye stirring up trouble. The entire chat group seemed to have come to life as if someone had sent a red packet. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 951. It had been 2 days since Rinpoche had been captured. 1 day after Rinpoche was taken away, the Empress received the news. Tong Xinye said that Rinpoche wouldn't be able to escape a beating when he returned. He wasn't trying to scare Rinpoche. If Rinpoche dared to tell the Empress that he was just going to talk about life and ideals, Tong Xinye still remembered Her Majesty's reaction at that time. The Empress, who was originally indifferent, suddenly froze as if she was frozen in place. This was the first time he had seen her react like this since she ascended the throne. She then asked in a daze, "What? Your Majesty, Zhao Prince Consort has been captured." When? Who did it? Yesterday morning. We still don't know who did it. The Empress came back to her senses and immediately became gloomy. It was as if a storm was coming, and the pressure from her body made everyone in the hall breathless. Where? The Empress's question was out of the blue, but the person who came to report still knew what she wanted to ask. Haiyun District, Misty Rain Pavilion. What about Xianzhe? What about Lin Xiaola? What about Li Yuanzhu? The Empress emphasized every word she said. Are they dead? They are fine. As soon as the incident happened, General Xianzhe rushed back to Pingdu to pass on the news. Why aren't they dead? The Empress's voice was full of anger. Why couldn't so many people protect a single person? These people were all fine, but Ren Baqian had been captured? After the Empress finished her sentence, she disappeared from the hall. She didn't even say that the court was dismissed and just left. After the Empress left, the hall boiled over like a pot of boiling water. Ren Baqian's capture was the most serious matter for both the Empress and Dayo. The changes in Dayo had begun to show. Especially after witnessing the nuclear bomb, the people in court now attached more importance to Ren Baqian. Whether it was the steam train or the diesel internal combustion engine that was being developed, they placed great importance on them. However, at this time Ren Baqian, who was the mastermind behind all this, had been captured. Immediately many people wanted to go to the Yun nation to kill him. But before they could finish arguing, an aura had already arrived in front of the main hall from the rear palace. Your Majesty. Everyone turned to look at the front of the hall and saw the Empress sitting on Qi Shui's back with a longbow in her hand. A quiver of bone arrows hung beside Qi Shui. This was all that the Empress had. The Empress took a deep breath, suppressed her anger and said to Shi Qin, inform Zidonglai to tell everyone in the Yun nation that they have two choices, find Zhao Prince Consort or die. All the people of the Yun nation. The Empress repeated. This time, it wasn't just the practitioners of the Yun nation, but the nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation. This showed how angry the Empress was. If something really happened to him, she dared to bury all the people of the Yun nation with him. Even if it left behind a world of blood and countless blood feuds, it didn't matter. Everyone in the imperial court was flabbergasted. Even they were shocked by the Empress's order. It was not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people. It was tens or even tens of millions of people. That was 5 times the population of the Aboriginals. To kill all of them. Everyone felt a little pressured. Based on the current military strength of Dayo, they could transfer troops from the Protectorate of the North and Protectorate of the South to the Yun nation, which could reach a maximum of 80,000 soldiers. If they had to kill everyone, with 80,000 soldiers, how many does one person have to kill? Someone asked softly. 100, right? Nonsense, it's obviously 10 by 10. What's the difference between 10 by 10 and 100? Someone from the Ministry of Revenue couldn't help but ask. It's much more than that. One person has to kill at least 1,000. Oh, I see. That's right. Everyone in the hall had already started to think about how many people one person had to kill. After the Empress finished speaking, she ignored everyone's reaction, rode Qi Shui out of the palace alone, and headed for the Yun nation. A group of ministers followed behind her, and they followed Qi Shui to persuade the Empress. At least bring a few more people and have someone to take care of her. However, after a few dozen kilometers, they were still left far behind by Qi Shui. After a discussion, more than half of them returned to Lan City, and the other half went straight to the Yun nation. One day and night, a full 20 hours. The Empress ran for nearly 1,000 kilometers within these 20 hours, and Qi Shui's body began to bubble. There was a large amount of water stored in Qi Shui's body and on the surface of its skin. However, as it ran for a long time, every cell on its body was breathing and trying its best to absorb energy from the outside world. This resulted in a result. The water and air fused on the surface of Qi Shui's body and changed. Due to the high-speed wind, they finally turned into bubbles. Along the way, bubbles danced all over the sky, and the Empress followed behind Qi Shui like a bubble flag. The Empress went straight to Pingdu, and the first thing she asked upon arrival was, Zhao Prince Consort, is there any news? The second thing she said was, give it water, a lot of it. The third thing she said was, where are they? The Empress was furious, but she wasn't given a chance to vent. Xianzhe and the others were still looking for clues outside. Has my message been passed down? The Empress asked Zidonglai with a cold face. I have already informed all the sects in the Yun nation and posted it in all the cities. Zidonglai's face was still cold. This was mainly because he had injured his facial nerves in the past, so his face was expressionless. He didn't discount the Empress's orders at all. Although it hadn't been posted all over the Yun nation, it had been posted in most of the cities. Overnight, it could be said that the entire Yun nation was shaken. For the sake of one person, nearly 100 million people of the Yun nation were going to be buried. It could be said that the Yun nation, which had just settled down, was once again in turmoil. This news immediately aroused the anger of all the people of the Yun nation. People scolded the Empress for being arrogant and cruel. All of a sudden, the youths of the Yun nation were so angry that they almost revolted. They could still retreat previously, but with this news, if it really reached that point, no one could retreat anymore. Before this, many people of the Yun nation didn't know who Zhao Prince Consort was. Only when the Empress's husband was mentioned would people suddenly realize who he was. However, after this, there was no one who didn't know the name Zhao Prince Consort. Of course, it wasn't anything positive. However, the Empress didn't care about this, and neither did Zidong Lai. The only person who cared about this matter still didn't know. The Empress rested for a few hours in Pingdu. Although she wanted to go directly to the place where Rinpoche had disappeared, she could endure it. However, Qi Shui couldn't and needed to rest for at least a few hours to recover a little. Just as she was about to set off again, she received news from Rinpoche. When she heard that he was fine, the Empress felt exhaustion wash over her. It wasn't physical exhaustion but mental exhaustion. From yesterday morning until now she had been tense all the time. She quickly walked to the room with the radio station and heard Rinpoche's voice talking to everyone through the radio station. Hearing this voice, the Empress felt that her tense nerves could finally relax. She took a few steps forward, took the radio station's walkie-talkie and asked in a deep voice, "Where are you?" "I should be in Great Xia." Rinpoche's voice immediately weakened when he heard the Empress's deep and cold voice. "Are you in danger now? Specific location? I'm going to look for you." The Empress really didn't want to wait for Rinpoche to come back on his own. What she urgently wanted now was to rush over and capture him. Then, she would hang him from the beam of the palace and give him a good beating. She would then ground him and forbid him from leaving a radius of 50 kilometers from Lan City. As for the person who had captured Rinpoche, that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. The most important thing was to find out where Rinpoche was and whether he was in danger. She would only be at ease if she went there herself. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 952. Even though it was only one day, which was a very short period of time, it was truly a torment for the Empress. Fortunately, she was relieved after receiving Rinpoche's message. However, Rinpoche didn't tell her his current location. After all, there were more than a dozen people looking at him. He used the radio station to communicate because they wanted to see a tool that could allow them to communicate from thousands of kilometers away. When the voices of Hong Wu, Tong Jinye, and the others came out of the radio station, everyone in the hall gasped in unison. There was also the sound of people slapping their thighs. It was indeed like this. It was indeed true. To be able to communicate from thousands of kilometers away, the value of such a treasure was too great. If it were owned by an ordinary person, it would definitely be kept a secret and wouldn't be used until the most critical moment. However, for the other party, this was a commonplace tool that didn't need to be concerned about. This could be seen from their attitude. Rinpoche simply said a few words, turned off the radio station and looked up at the crowd again. "Everyone, it's time to change things. I believe that you will choose your future well." Were they going to be reared as cattle or sheep, or were they going to use this opportunity to fight for their lives? Since things had already reached this point, Rinpoche wasn't worried about their choice. In fact, they had indeed made a choice and this was their only chance. If they had a choice, who would be willing to be livestock for the rest of their lives? Moreover, these were top experts who stood at the top of the human race. Everyone was silent and waiting for someone to speak. "I saw that you brought someone with you just now. I want to go to your country to take a look." An old woman's voice was heard. Everyone's eyes were filled with astonishment, but they quickly lowered their gazes. Although this request was abrupt, it seemed reasonable after thinking about it. Who wouldn't want to see such a world with their own eyes? Rinpoche looked at her with a faint smile and said, "I refuse." "What?" The old woman's face darkened. "You aren't qualified." Rinpoche said faintly, not caring about what the person in front of him thought. "I'm just giving you a chance. You aren't qualified to ask for anything. Even if you have chosen your path, it's all for your own sake. What does that have to do with me?" Everyone was speechless as they thought about Rinpoche's words. Although they didn't feel good, he was right. They were only doing it for themselves. The old woman looked sullen. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like this. Besides, what could they do even if he rejected them? The other party had already proven that his words were true. Perhaps Rinpoche could threaten Zhongshan with his life and the Empress's life. However, the other people in the Temple of Heaven wouldn't agree to it. The first person to oppose Rinpoche would be Deputy Temple Master Zhongshan. Now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. After taking a few deep breaths, the old woman regained her composure. Then can you let us leave this land of exile? This was also everyone's hope. Since Rinpoche could come, it meant that he could leave as well. Everyone suspected that he had a passage to enter and exit the banished lands. Some people's hearts were in their throats as they stared intently at his expression. As long as they could leave the banished land, they would be able to fly freely. Since they were able to achieve what they had today among billions of humans, no one would worry about leaving this place. However, there were also people who sneered. This kind of thinking was weak in itself. No. I came here by accident. I can leave through quantum transmission and I can even take a few people with me. However, are you going to abandon all humans and run away? I have no intention of helping you. There is only one choice for you, and that is to fight. For yourselves and for all humans, fight against the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the foreign races until you leave this place. This is where your value lies, and this is where the humans here can show their value. Everyone was silent for a while before someone said, "What do you want to do? What do you want us to do?" This attitude confirmed Rinpoche's position. After all, he came from a more powerful human race. He could change all of this and leave at any time. Rinpoche smirked. Like I said, fight, war, defeat the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the enemy until you step on all the corpses in the world or are stepped on by others. Of course, I will bring you technology just like what I'm doing now. The development of technology requires time and resources. The experts of the human race also have the potential to compete with the experts of the enemy. However, before that, I have a request. Rinpoche's gaze slid across everyone's faces that were hidden in the shadows. Cut off your own rotten flesh. The purpose of the establishment of the Temple of Heaven is good. However, over the past thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has become a malignant tumor within the human race. I hope to see your side that is valuable to the human race. In fact, what he wanted to say was to disband the Temple of Heaven. This land didn't need an uncontrolled organization with so many experts lurking in the dark. However, he also understood that this proposal was almost impossible to achieve. On the contrary, it would make everyone hostile to him, which wouldn't do him any good. Therefore, he simply buried this idea in his heart and thought of ways to rope them in later. This world would change faster and faster, and these old and rotten people would eventually be unable to keep up with the times and be abandoned by this era. After listening to Rinpoche's words, everyone had their own thoughts. Most of them were unconvinced, but no one spoke up because it didn't affect their interests. Who's Su Wuming? Rinpoche asked. I am. Are you asking me because of the Yun Nation? I can tell you that I was the one who did it. What do you want me to do? A thin old man with 100 strands of hair opened his eyes. His eyes seemed to contain a sword, and his gaze became like a sword that pierced people's skin. Rinpoche had some impression of this person because he didn't have any surprised reactions like the others. He just sat there quietly, but it was impossible to ignore him. Besides you, there are others, right? Rinpoche asked faintly. Su Wuming was silent. Although it wasn't difficult for him to kill Wu Kai, it wasn't his turn to kill ordinary warriors. The traces of weapons left at the scene also explained everything. I arranged it, Wen Shaoxing said calmly. In fact, Rinpoche knew even if he didn't say it. Luohua sect was also your doing, right? Rinpoche asked again. It was arranged by the Corpse Dog Hall, Wen Shaoxing replied. Rinpoche could feel everyone's eyes on him. After pondering for a while, he realized that this matter wasn't easy to handle. After all, Su Wuming wasn't an ordinary person. Regardless of his strength, he was also a member of the Temple of Heaven. Besides, this matter definitely wasn't decided by Su Wuming alone. If Rinpoche wanted to force him to death, how could the others sit back and watch? Needless to say, the fox mourned the death of the rabbit. Besides, there were still Wen Shaoxing and the others. As for the matter of Luohua sect, he didn't care much. If that was the only thing, he would just smile and let it go. However, he couldn't let Wu Kai go. Even if the two sides were enemies before, according to the novels, shouldn't the enmity be resolved with a smile and no longer be pursued? Shouldn't the overall situation be more important? If he said this to the Empress, would she listen? Not to mention the Empress, even the other people in the court wouldn't agree. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was the habit of the Aboriginals. Rinpoche had been on the side of the Aboriginals since he came to this world, so he naturally had to stand on their side. Rinpoche pondered but couldn't figure it out. In fact, he had considered this problem on Earth. However, this problem was still unsolvable. Rinpoche lowered his eyelids slightly and finally made a decision. A life for a life, a debt for a life. As soon as he said this, it was as if a volcano had erupted in the main hall, and a tyrannical aura pierced the sky. Not far away, everyone in the fishing village stopped in their tracks and looked in the direction of the sea god temple with bewilderment. Baidu search 881 Chinese network. No advertising words. Chapter 953. A life for a life and a debt for a life. This voice was heard in the hall and everyone was in an uproar. One by one, the doddering elders opened their eyes with a cold glint in them. A tyrannical aura swept through the hall, and cracks appeared on the statue in the temple of the sea god above. This was no longer a matter of Su Wuming, but of the entire temple of heaven. Su Wuming was the venerable of the temple of heaven, and everything he did represented the temple of heaven. Rinpoche's other requests could still be discussed, but the people of the temple of heaven couldn't agree to this one. Many of them were even angrier. Even if he was from another human nation, how dare he make such a request? Rinpoche lowered his eyes slightly and let those auras surround him. In fact, everyone had a sense of propriety and didn't directly attack Rinpoche with their auras. Otherwise, more than a dozen top spirit wheel experts could seriously injure Rinpoche with their auras alone. Rinpoche sighed in his heart. After going around in circles, everything had returned to the beginning, and the effect of his previous words had been wasted. How could he not know that the other party couldn't agree to this request? However, he still had to show such an attitude. This was because he was Zhao Prince Consort of Dayo. He couldn't tell the Empress and the court to give up their hatred for the sake of the overall situation, right? He couldn't do it. Whether emotionally or in other aspects, Dayo was his home in this world. As for reason, Rinpoche felt that he was still in the right now, but unfortunately the other party probably wouldn't reason with him. Forget it, let it go back to the original position. Fortunately, there were still two gains. One was that he knew who the mastermind was, and the other was that he had at least saved his life. This was the most important thing. As for the Temple of Heaven itself, it was dispensable in Rinpoche's heart. Although they were indeed powerful and needed such tyrannical experts, they would definitely be able to go further after leaving Tianjin Basin, especially Su Wuming. However, as mentioned before, such a powerful and uncontrollable force was of little value to Rinpoche. It could even be said that the disadvantages outweighed the advantages. The stronger they were, the more troublesome it would be in the future. With this in mind, Rinpoche's desire to subdue these people faded. If possible, it would be a good choice to blow them up with a nuclear bomb. Without this force there would be less trouble. Unfortunately, the 8 sub-hall masters and vice-hall masters were still outside. If they were blown up, the remaining forces would retaliate crazily. Moreover, his teleportation cooldown was not up yet. Rinpoche opened his eyes, looked at everyone and said faintly, "Think about it yourselves. Of course, you can also hide here and wait for the day when the human race becomes glorious." This was another opportunity for them to lay low from now on. With the skills of these people and the influence they had in the dark, it would be very difficult for the Empress to find them. After he finished speaking, he carried the unconscious foreigner, jumped down from the statue's shoulder, and walked out without looking back. He believed that these people would not do anything to him. Then his vision went black. "Temple Master, we can't touch this person." Zhong Shang sat on the statue with a faint smile in his eyes. "Even if it is for the sake of the human race. We can't let him leave for now." The old lady landed on the statue that Rinpoche was originally sitting on. She stretched out her hand and opened the box that was slightly bigger than a person. Other than the radio station, there was also a metal box. She didn't know what was inside. "Temple Master, what are we going to do with him?" Zhong Shang asked again. "Although this person is from the outside world and is of great importance, he is too arrogant and doesn't respect the Temple of Heaven at all. Let's keep him for a few days and discuss how to deal with him. We'll only keep him for a few days. After he wakes up, he must have a way to leave," Zhong Shang said. Although the old lady didn't say anything, she was quite happy. Originally this person was a little troublesome, but now he was courting death. Whoever dared to agree to his conditions would be a traitor of the Temple of Heaven. In recent years, the pressure from Zhong Shang to force her to abdicate had been increasing. Now she could recruit Su Wuming and the others who were originally neutral, which was also a good thing. With a shake of her feet, the radio station and the metal box flew out. When she opened the metal box, she saw a cylinder that was half the height of a person. It wasn't light and its surface was completely made of metal. She didn't know what it was used for. The old lady returned to the statue with the cylinder and the radio station and repeated, "It's impossible to agree to his request. A life for a life? What a joke. This person came from the outside world, but he wasn't without weaknesses. Qi Zixiao was his weakness. Lock him up for a few days and don't let him wake up. Inform the sub-temple masters to come back for a discussion. Chief, I'm very interested in this person. How about keeping him with me? You won't be worried with me guarding him, right?" Zhong Shang suddenly said. The old lady's eyes flickered. She originally wanted to keep Rinpoche by her side to see why the soul worm didn't work. She sensed that the soul worm was fine at the moment. However, since Zhong Shang had spoken, she couldn't refute. Moreover, if something really happened to this person, she would have an excuse. The old lady nodded. "This person is very important. Deputy, don't let anything happen to him." "Of course." Zhong Shang laughed. "That's all for today." Without saying a word, everyone got up one after another and disappeared from the hall. They also had to consider what to do in the future. Many people were also sighing in their hearts. Rinpoche's words originally tempted them, but unfortunately the other party made a request that they couldn't agree to. The future situation was a little unpredictable. They really needed some time to weigh their options. Su Wuming took a deep look at Rinpoche and left without saying a word. It wasn't until Zhong Shang left with Rinpoche and the strange man that the old lady snorted and sat there with her eyes closed. After a full hour, the stone statue under the old woman suddenly moved. The stone statue moved several meters to the side, revealing a pitch-black passage. The old lady walked into the passage, and the stone statue returned to its original position again. After walking down hundreds of steps along the passage, a small room appeared in front of them. In addition to the 2 oil lamps on the wall, there was a chair and a table. The most eye-catching thing was the 5 crystal coffins on the other side. There was an old man lying in each coffin. His whole body was soaked in a blue liquid, and even his nose and mouth were immersed in the liquid. However, if one took a closer look at these old men, they actually looked somewhat similar to the chief of the Temple of Heaven. The old lady stood in front of the coffin closest to the door for a moment, took a bell from the wall and shook it. The crisp sound of the bell seemed to have some kind of mysterious penetrating power, as if it came from the distant horizon. The old man in the crystal coffin at the end suddenly opened his eyes. Golden light burst out from his eyes, intertwined with the blue liquid, and dyed the liquid green. If Rinpoche saw this scene, he would definitely praise it. It was green and bright. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 954. The update had to be delayed. Originally, he had slept during the day and felt quite energetic after waking up. He had just changed the time, slept at night and still felt like sleeping during the day. Just now, he had slept from 12 noon to 5 p.m. He reckoned that he had failed to adjust the time again. He felt stifled. Of course, these were all small problems. The most important thing was to garner support for his biological daughter. Throw all the tickets at her. The role of the year in the female Empress's Gigolo was garnering support for his biological daughter. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 955. The elders in the 5 coffins were all old women. Their hair was all white and their skin was full of wrinkles and spots. The old woman at the end opened her eyes and stiffly stretched out her hands to push open the crystal coffin above her. She sat up and greedily breathed in the world's air. The liquid slid down the surface of her body and finally gathered in the coffin to form a calm water surface. There was not a single drop of liquid left on the old woman's body, and the surface of her skin was only slightly damp. The old woman greedily breathed in the world's air. Her eyes scanned the room and finally focused on the temple master. The muscles on her face twitched a few times, and she stretched out her stiff hands to rub her cheeks and throat. Finally, she spoke in a voice that sounded like 2 pieces of wood rubbing against each other. "Qingdian, how long has it been?" 83 years and 107 days, the temple master replied. 83 years. The old woman in the coffin repeated softly. She turned her head stiffly and glanced at the other coffins. She asked, "Haven't you found a suitable container yet?" "Not yet. It's too rare to find a container that can meet the requirements for the sixth conversion," the temple master said. "It's getting rarer. When Qing Ting was around, one or two of them could be found occasionally. However, when I was around, I didn't encounter one in hundreds of years," the old woman in the coffin said. "This will be the last time I wake up. If I still don't have a container the next time I wake up, I will turn into ashes and die. I will never have the chance to change my container again." She then looked up at the temple master and said, "You are my only descendant and the last one here. This is the second time you will be changing your container. There are still 1,000 years left. There's a chance you should go back. After so many years, everything in the Temple of Heaven has been set in stone. Even without you, the Temple of Heaven will continue to follow its previous path. As for us, Qingju and Qingzi no longer have the chance to change their containers. Qing Ting still has 100 years left, and no matter how much I delay it, I will only have 300 years left after I wake up. If there's no hope, then destroy everything here." From the old woman's tone, it could be seen that she was not too keen on finding another container and changing her container again. Now, delaying her life was just an instinct that had long been seen through. Even if she fell into eternal darkness after this deep sleep, it would not cause too much of a stir in her heart. Even if this awakening reduced her existence by another 200 years, she didn't care at all. After that, he asked, "What happened to wake me up this time?" The temple master said, "If there were no changes, it would indeed be as you said. Even without me, the Temple of Heaven would continue on its original path. But now something has changed." The temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple frowned. The old woman in the coffin raised her head and looked at her. "It seems very serious, otherwise you wouldn't have woken me up. In addition to this place, there is also a group of humans." The chief of the Temple of Heaven told him about Rinpoche in detail. The old woman's expression didn't change, but the golden light in her eyes became more and more intense. After a while, the golden light in the old woman's eyes gradually dimmed. "It's not necessarily a bad thing. Whatever they want to do, let them do it. You just need to continue doing what you're doing. Don't be impatient. The importance of the Temple of Heaven has already begun to decline, but it seems that it is still very useful." Then he said meaningfully, "What's theirs is ours. As long as you bring everything they have to the God of Gold Zun, not only will everything they have become useless, but you might also be able to learn something from it. After all, our path has reached its limit, and we haven't been able to find a way to go further for many years. This is an opportunity. What I'm worried about is the other group of humans. According to that person, they are very powerful. From what he said about the Zerg and Protoss, although they aren't as powerful as the God of Gold Armor and the other deities, they aren't easy to deal with, and their numbers are even more terrifying," the temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. "That's why we have to bring things back and turn what's theirs into ours. As long as we understand them, we can find their weaknesses. Besides, most importantly, have you noticed that their individual strength is very weak, and they don't have the power to resist our race? As long as we can find their location, everything they have will also be ours," the old woman said faintly. "I understand," the temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple said. "This may be the last time we meet in this world. I will return to the spiritual temple and wait for you." After the old woman finished speaking, she greedily took a few more breaths before slowly lying back in the coffin. The temple master of the Heaven Dao Temple silently closed the lid of the crystal coffin, turned around and walked out. The Empress looked at Xenja, Lin Xiaola, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, and the others in front of her with a calm expression. Although it was calm, it was like a storm brewing on the surface of a calm sea. "Remove Xenja from her position as the commander of the guards and send her to the mines for 3 years," the Empress said coldly. "Remove Lin Xiaola from her position as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall and send her to the mines for a year. Xenja's job was as a guard. After such a big incident, she was only sent to the mines for 3 years because nothing had happened to Rinpoche. If Rinpoche hadn't contacted her through the radio, the Empress would have thought of pulling Xenja down and beheading her." Xenja silently bowed to the Empress, took off her helmet, put it on the ground and began to take off her armor. Zidonglai looked down and stood to one side. Xenja took off her armor. In addition to safety pants, there was also a sports vest that was given to her by Rinpoche. "Give her a set of coarse clothes and immediately send her to the mines," the Empress said in a deep voice. She turned to look at Lin Xiaola, only to see her head lowered and not saying a word. However, Her nose was bubbling. The Empress was a little angry even though she knew that this situation was normal for Lin Xiaola. Lin Xiaola, add one more crime and send her to the mines for 3 years as well. Lin Xiaola was speechless. Drag her away. Is it over? What did Her Majesty say? Lin Xiaola raised her head and asked softly as she was dragged out by the arms. I didn't think it through. Li Yuanzhu said faintly after seeing Qi Zixiao's gaze. Although she wasn't from Dayo and Qi Zixiao didn't have the right to punish her, she still felt guilty and took the initiative to speak. Go back to Great Xia. I don't want to see you. Sorry. Li Yuanzhu cupped her hands at the Empress. She knew that the Empress was furious at the moment and would wait for Ren Baqin to return. She pulled Lin Yu out of the courtyard. Lin Yu was deep in thought. After they were out of the city, Lin Yu asked doubtfully, in that case can I only go to the mines to play with Lin Xiaola in the future? Which mine? Li Yuanzhu turned to look and felt helpless. She didn't know what to do with this girl. Back then she took a long time to say that Ren Baqin was upstairs. When everyone returned he was already gone. She felt like killing her. If she had said it at that time, none of these things would have happened. Let's go back to Great Xia. Half a day later, Lin Yu suddenly thought of something and said, we have run out of melon seeds. Let's go back to Lan City to buy some. First set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 956. After Li Yuanzhu and the rest left, the Empress sat on a chair and stroked the bulge in her abdomen. Zidonglai stood quietly at the side without saying a word. Have they all retreated? The Empress's gaze was still on the ground as she asked faintly. They've retreated. However, the news has spread, and the people from the Yun nation don't seem too happy, Zidonglai said casually. In fact, they weren't just unhappy. Their discontent was like a volcano eruption. His country had just been destroyed, and he had just convinced himself to start a new life under a steel knife. Suddenly, he had to bury nearly 100 million people in the Yun nation with him? Although the message was cancelled after only 1 day, who knew if it was really cancelled? Would it happen again after a while? What did the Aboriginals treat the people of the Yun nation as? Pigs and dogs? Under such circumstances, one could imagine how the people of the Yun nation would react. However, Zidonglai simply said, I'm not too happy. The Empress pondered for a moment and said, appease them. It wasn't that the Empress didn't know the significance of the Yun nation. Then he said, if there are any who make a big fuss, kill one to warn the others. I will order the rearguard commandery to assist you later. Yes. The value of the rearguard commandery in the Yun nation wasn't small. The rearguard commandery could do a lot of things that the military couldn't, especially when it came to the situation among the people in the underworld. At this point, the significance of Ren Baqin's establishment of the rearguard commandery could already be seen. Go down. The Empress waved her hand. After Zidonglai left, the Empress stroked her lower abdomen. Her thoughts turned to Ren Baqin as she wondered where he was now. That small body of his could be smacked to death with a single slap. In the future, I will definitely not let him go too far away. I kind of want to drink calcium milk. Could that guy's hair be saved? Forget it, it doesn't matter. After thinking about it, the Empress smiled. A moment later, he furrowed his brows. Where was that fellow? Where was Great Xia located? At this moment he was on a planet in his sea of knowledge. He did not expect the other party to suddenly attack him. He did not expect that after he fainted, he would appear in his sea of consciousness after an unknown amount of time. Unfortunately, he could not wake up his body. The other party must have used some sort of method. What was he planning to do? No matter what the other party planned to do, there was no need to pay attention to it. He had given them a chance, but since they had other ideas, he would send them to reunite. In the box he brought back, other than the radio, there was a 400,000-ton nuclear warhead, and it could be detonated with a delay. Originally, the negotiations were going well, and he thought that the situation was settled. The nuclear bomb was just a precaution, but he didn't expect that it would actually be used. It was a pity that he had wasted so much time and effort. Ren Baqin felt a little regretful. In the end, he still had to take this step. There were many experts in the Temple of Heaven, and if one were to select carefully, there would still be people who could be of use. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time or opportunity to do so. Compared to them, his strength was still too weak. Just like this time, he had no ability to resist at all. It was better to send them on their way. After a while, he began to study the city below again. This new city was the core of Dayo and would be the center of the entire human race in the future, so it had to be as perfect as possible. In the endless darkness of the starry sky, a silkworm-like insect was flying into the distance. Not knowing how far ahead it was, there was a colorful area. It seemed to be even bigger than the previous balls. That human's knowledge bead was probably hidden there. However, this human sea of knowledge was too big. That area didn't seem far, but after flying for so long, it still couldn't get closer. Naturally, Rinpoche didn't know that there was an insect flying around in his sea of knowledge, let alone what the so-called pearl of knowledge was. Back then, he had invested everything he had into the singularity. In the end, it had evolved into such a huge universe. After staying in his sea of knowledge for an unknown period of time, Rinpoche felt a suction coming from a certain point in his sea of knowledge. He knew that he could finally wake up. After a moment of dizziness, Rinpoche finally felt the existence of his body. He had to admit that it was convenient to use the divine sense in his sea of knowledge, and he could even shout, "I said, let there be light." However, without a physical body, it always made him feel empty. When he opened his eyes, he found himself on a couch. The surrounding environment was an antique and rather exquisite room that was mainly made of brown solid wood. A faint fragrance lingered in front of his nose, making him want to take a deep breath and swallow it into his stomach. In addition to himself, there was an old man sitting on a chair in the room, holding a cup of tea and slowly sipping it. The old man looked gentle with a faint smile in his eyes. He wore a green robe and sat very straight. "Mr. Ren, I was rude before." Rinpoche sat up from the bed and felt his body, but there was no discomfort. After feeling his body, Rinpoche looked up and asked, "Who are you?" It was too dark in the hall earlier, and he couldn't see the faces of everyone clearly. It was difficult for him to recognize the person in front of him. "I'm Zhongshang, one of the deputy temple masters of the Temple of Heaven." Rinpoche nodded. It turned out that this person was Zhongshang. Temple Master Zong. How much time has passed? 4 days. That was enough time. Rinpoche turned his gaze to the furnishings in the room and looked at them with some regret. "Mr. Ren, don't you have anything to ask?" Zhongshang asked with a smile. "What do I need to ask?" Rinpoche asked faintly. "I've given you a chance to choose." Zhongshang's eyes darkened. "Mr. Ren, we can't hand over Su Wuming. He represents the Temple of Heaven." "I've also given you a chance to disappear from now on," Rinpoche said bluntly. "However, it seems that you think I'm joking with you." "It was the Temple Master's decision to keep you," Zhongshang said. "For me, it might not be a bad thing to disappear from now on. The Temple of Heaven has carried too many burdens for too long." Rinpoche sneered, turned his head and continued to look at the furnishings. In fact, there have always been 2 voices in the Temple of Heaven. One of them represents the current actions of the Temple of Heaven, while the other expresses disgust with some of the actions. "You mean that the Temple Master is the former and you are the latter?" Rinpoche asked with his back facing Zhongshang. "That's right. However, we are too few in number and aren't strong enough to change the situation of the Temple of Heaven." Zhongshang nodded with a smile. "Therefore, I came to see you in the hope of cooperating with you." "What qualifications do you have to cooperate with me?" Rinpoche was finally a little interested, but his words lacked interest and weren't polite at all. "For so many years, the Temple of Heaven has been in the dark, watching the changes in the world and grasping a lot of things. I think there should be a place where you can use it." Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The other party's attitude was quite humble this time. "Tell me about it." The smile on Zhongshang's face slowly faded and he said seriously, "Kill the Temple Master. He's not human. First set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 957. The person who killed the chief of the temple isn't human. Hearing these words echoing in the room, Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look at Zhongshang and saw that his face was serious and his eyes were filled with killing intent. Zhongshang's face, which originally looked gentle and kind, was now a little fierce. "How did you know?" Rinpoche asked in a deep voice. He had wondered if there would be foreign races in the temple, but it was just a thought. He didn't expect that there would be people in the temple who knew about it. The seriousness on Zhongshang's face eased slightly. He got up and walked to Rinpoche's side. He moved a shelf, and it slid silently to the side, revealing a tunnel. "Please follow me." Zhongshang got up and walked down. He took a flint from the wall next to him, lit a torch, and the tunnel was immediately illuminated. The two of them walked all the way down and finally came to a secret room. "Your defenses aren't very tight," Rinpoche said lightly. How could the chief of the temple and the foreign races be placed in such a simple secret room? If someone else had come in by mistake, Zhongshan would have turned into ashes by now. It looks simple, but in fact, it requires special finger strength to knock dozens of times in an instant. Other than me, no one can come in unless this residence is razed to the ground. However, at that time, our branch will probably be extinct. It won't be a big deal even if we are discovered, Zhongshan explained as he led the way. Rinpoche finally understood. "Your branch?" Rinpoche asked again. When the temple was founded, there were a total of 42 ancestors, and a total of 31 branches were passed down. Over time, these 31 branches became 19 branches. There are exactly 8 chief, 2 deputy chief, and 1 chief. Rinpoche did some calculations and found that this number was just right. Where there are people, there will be disputes. Zhongshan sighed. Rinpoche immediately knew where this number came from. However, about half of them died without knowing why. Zhongshan said again. As he spoke, he lit a few oil lamps hanging on the wall in the secret room, and everything in the room was suddenly revealed. There was nothing in the space, not even the simplest stool. Instead, the walls were full of paintings. Upon closer inspection, they were all women. What was surprising was that one of the portraits on the wall was of a young woman, another of an old woman, then another young woman, then another old woman, and so on. Zhongshan pointed to 2 of the pictures and said, "This is the first temple master Yujing. This is after she grew old. This is the second palace master of the Yujing Palace, as well as after he grew old." Rinpoche stood in front of the wall and looked at them one by one. Suddenly he gasped in surprise. "That's Hall Master Faidu. He should be the 3rd Hall Master's faction. This is Vice Palace Lord Yujing, the 4th one. This is the Deputy Palace Master of the Palace of Heaven, the 5th. Zhongshan introduced the paintings one by one. If one only looked at the pictures of them when they were young, one wouldn't be able to see much. They had different appearances, different temperaments, and different beauty and ugliness. However, if one looked at the portraits of their old age, one would see that all of their faces were somewhat similar. No matter what their faces were like when they were young, whether they were peerlessly beautiful or ugly when they grew old, they actually looked quite similar. They were even exactly the same. For example, the 1st Temple Master Yujing, the 4th Deputy Palace Master Yujing, the 7th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven, and the 14th Temple Master of the Kain Temple. For example, the 2nd Temple Master Yujing, the 11th Temple Master Yujing, and the 14th Temple Master of the Palace of Heaven. They were almost carved from the same mold. However, when they were young, these people had almond-shaped eyes, slanted eyes, oval faces, and round faces. However, when they grew old, they actually looked like they were carved from the same mold. In addition, the appearance of each temple master was also quite similar, especially their eyes, which seemed to have a kind of, due to their martial arts, their lifespan is longer than that of ordinary warriors. Therefore, very few people can discover the changes in their appearance. Rinpoche was a little puzzled. Why did you draw every temple master? Because every one of them was a woman. Upon hearing this answer, Rinpoche felt that Zhongshan's faction was actually quite pitiful. Because the first 2 temple masters Yujing were quite popular, some people naturally kept their portraits at that time. However, some problems were discovered after that. They were too similar in their old age, Zhongshan continued. Rinpoche felt that there should be more than 2 temple masters. Just 2 temple masters didn't mean anything. Zhongshan definitely wasn't telling the truth. However, this had nothing to do with him. He wasn't interested in the dark history of Zhongshan's faction. He wasn't interested at all. What was wrong with men being a little wretched and perverted? At first, we thought that it was because of their martial arts, but that wasn't the case. They were always secretly looking for a replacement, which wasn't surprising. We were the same. However, their approach seemed to be somewhat different. In a short period of time, the strength of those who took over would increase greatly, and the original temple master would die. Those who took over would be promoted in a very short period of time and be very familiar with many things, which was why we were aware of the problem. In fact, 1,000 years after coming to this land, the human race had a renaissance. At that time, many outstanding people were born. There were 11 people in the world who had reached the level of opening up heaven and earth, and thousands of spirit will experts. At that time, some people proposed to return to their homeland, and even many people in the Temple of Heaven thought so. This was because the reproduction ability of the foreign races was far inferior to ours, and their recovery ability wasn't as good as ours. At that time, large areas of land were empty. As long as they found a place to stay and persisted for more than 10 years, it was possible for them to regain their foothold and return to their homeland. However, this idea was later interrupted, and they killed those outstanding people who wanted to leave. They were also the ones who caused all of this. From then on, our faction began to pay attention to them and finally discovered the truth. In fact, it wasn't just us. There were others who also discovered it, but they later died for various reasons. Only we have survived until now, Zhongxiang briefly recounted. Why didn't you say it out loud? Wasn't the entire Temple of Heaven a match for her alone? Rinpoche asked. She wasn't alone, Zhongxiang replied. Back then, someone revealed this news in a meeting attended by half of the people. As a result, 5 factions completely sided with her and survived. In addition, the temple masters of 11 factions died, and 4 of the factions that didn't have a successor were completely destroyed. Rinpoche sneered after hearing this. There were actually people who sided with the foreign races. Zhongxiang also looked a little ashamed when he talked about this matter. No one knows what happened at that time. However, one thing is certain. Her faction was stronger than it looked on the surface, and it might even be stronger than all of us combined. This was why 11 temple masters died and 5 temple masters had no choice but to side with her. After that, my faction didn't dare to act rashly because we should be the only ones who knew the truth. Zhongxiang sighed. If we were also severed, then the Temple of Heaven would really become a lackey of the foreign races. I originally thought that I wouldn't have a chance in this generation, but I didn't expect to meet another human faction. I felt that the opportunity one had been waiting for had finally arrived. From the story you told, you should have very powerful weapons that are enough to fight against her, Zhongxiang said. Su Wuming surpassed the spirit will level, right? He wasn't her match either? Rinpoche suddenly asked. There are still 1 or 2 people in every generation who can reach the heaven and earth domain. Back then there were also experts who weren't weaker than Su Wuming, Zhongxiang said. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows. He originally wanted to blow this place up, but the emergence of Zhongxiang made it a little difficult to deal with. Rinpoche did have a powerful weapon, but it also had a large area of effect. When that time came, it would be impossible for others to leave except for him. Otherwise, the other party would also notice that something was wrong. As for whether Zhongxiang's words were true or false, Rinpoche didn't have much doubt. This was because the old woman's reaction at that time had already made him feel strange. If the other party was from the foreign races, then it would make sense. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 958. As Rinpoche looked at the portraits hanging on the wall, he pondered over his own thoughts. The best way to kill the other party was to detonate the nuclear bomb directly. He didn't know where the nuclear bomb was after he fainted. The hall was underground, and if the nuclear bomb was brought elsewhere, the other party might not necessarily die. What about my box and the things inside? Rinpoche turned his head and asked. It's with the chief. I was afraid that she would do something to you, so I brought you out and didn't care about the box. The specific location? It should still be in the Temple of Heaven, which is the hall from that day. She rarely leaves there, Zhongxiang said. Rinpoche felt relieved when he heard this. The other party was dead for sure. With his own nuclear bomb by his side, he would definitely die. The only problem was that there were probably only a few people left in the Temple of Heaven. Rinpoche looked up and said frankly, I can kill her. However, I'm afraid that there won't be any survivors within a radius of dozens of kilometers. This includes the Temple of Heaven and this village. Rinpoche made a circle with his hand. Bung. That's all. Rinpoche raised his hands and made an explosion. And all of you will be buried with her. Zhongxiang's expression changed drastically. As long as she is dead, I can expose her identity and control the situation in the Temple of Heaven. Even if there are people standing with her, they won't be a match for the others. In that case, you have to bring the things in the box and send something else in at the same time. I can tell you that the box contains a weapon that I can use now. The result of using it is what I said just now. Rinpoche patted Zhongxiang on the shoulder and said, You saved your lives. If Zhongxiang hadn't made such a request to him and told him about the past, he would have been ready to detonate the bomb directly. He would go directly to Earth and run in a few days while wearing a radiation suit. Speaking of which, he kind of missed the Empress. If she saw him, she would be very happy. Although Zhongxiang didn't know what Rinpochen meant by saving their lives, he knew that Rinpochen naturally had a plan. He knew that Rinpochen had made up his mind when he woke up and didn't ask anything, so he didn't doubt Rinpochen's words. He was even a little glad that Rinpochen's methods were completely different from them. I can try. Her control over the Temple of Heaven has weakened over the years, and I have been trying to touch her bottom line. If I ask her for that kind of thing, I think she won't find it strange. Zhongxiang said, tomorrow is the day when the temple masters will come to discuss. In any case, whoever goes in will be buried with her. Rinpochen spread his hands. Zhongxiang thought for a moment. Understood. Where is it? What time is it now? When Rinpochen woke up, the sky outside was bright, but he didn't know the time. 3/4 to the hour. Rinpochen calculated in his mind. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. There was still time. Then he said calmly, now it's time to talk about something else. As I said before, you saved all of your lives. So what can you do for me? Zhongxiang wasn't surprised, nor did he care. Since his identity had been confirmed, everything he did was for the sake of the human race. We can hand over the entire Great Xia to you. Zhongxiang smiled at him. Do you have such great power? Rinpochen's heart skipped a beat. The Temple of Heaven could actually decide the ownership of this region of Great Xia? Zhongxiang said 2 words. Su Qing. He's actually one of your people. Rinpochen was indeed a little surprised. Yes, but he doesn't know it himself. Zhongxiang laughed. For thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has always been hidden behind the scenes. On the surface, they naturally have other identities to cover up. Among them, the Temple of Heaven also has another identity, the Zhanyang sect. Although not many people know about it, some large sects with a long history still know about it. Then Zhongxiang added, the Temple of Heaven will destroy the dissidents of the evil wind at night. This is the case with the Temple of Heaven. Now that Great Xia is in a hopeless situation, if this continues, it will only be a waste of the human race's blood. After hundreds of years, it will still reach this step. It is better to change the dynasty and change the weather when there is no cure. When Great Xia was founded, Rinpochen seemed to understand. The same identity as Su Qing. Zhongxiang nodded. Zhongxiang was still confident about this condition. Since he had to trust this person in front of him, it would be better to hand over the entire human race to him, which would have a greater chance of success. Dayo and the Yun nation were still too small. However, after Rinpochen understood, he just casually said, forget it, you can keep Great Xia for yourselves. Zhongxiang was stunned as he didn't expect Rinpochen to push such a great benefit away. One had to know that in the past thousands of years, many people had shed blood for the sake of becoming the ruler of Great Xia. Now that it was placed in front of Rinpochen, he didn't want it? Zhongxiang carefully observed Rinpochen's side profile, wanting to see if he was sincere or not. However, Rinpochen really didn't want it. Dayo and the Yun nation had already exhausted him, and he didn't even have time to cultivate with the Empress. If Great Xia was added to the mix, he wouldn't be able to live anymore. Managing and changing a country was something that only those who had done it would know. Holding the killing sword sounded good, but unless it was a fatuous ruler, who would be happy? Moreover, he had other ideas about Great Xia. As long as Dayo developed well enough and was attractive enough, Great Xia would naturally become Dayo's talent base. Looking at the United States in the past and China today, it had already pointed out the path for him. Zhongxiang couldn't help but ask, what do you think, Mr. Rin? I want the Temple of Heaven. Rinpochen turned his head and looked straight at him. If he didn't take down the Temple of Heaven at this time, it would be intolerable. Zhongxiang couldn't help but laugh. This is what I should do. With Mr. Ren's status, the Temple of Heaven will follow your lead for the sake of the human race. However, if the ruler of Great Xia changes, Su Qing will have nothing to do with the thief temple. This has been the case for thousands of years. Rinpochen didn't expect Zhongxiang to be so straightforward. Seeing that Zhongxiang was so understanding, he didn't have anything else to say. As for Great Xia, he really didn't want it. Since Zhongxiang was willing to be a weapon, it didn't matter if he kept the Temple of Heaven. Besides, it might be of great use in the future. As for Zhongxiang going back on his words in the future, Rinpochen wasn't worried about this. How about this? I'm hungry. I'll go eat and take a bath, then bring the things back, Rinpochen said. Please? I'll wait here. Zhongxiang took 3 steps back after saying this, distancing himself from Rinpochen. This approach made Rinpochen feel very comfortable. As the air distorted, Rinpoche disappeared into thin air. Zhongshan circled around the place where Rinpoche disappeared 3 times, but still couldn't figure out how he did it. He then heaved a sigh of relief. After thousands of years and generations, he had finally waited for this day to be set right. He didn't have to worry about the Temple of Heaven becoming a weapon in the hands of the foreign races. Moreover, there was finally hope for the human race. He didn't know if he would have the opportunity to see his homeland, the scattered star sea, the Valoran continent, and the vast world. After being distracted for a while, Zhongshan quickly came back to his senses. The most important thing now was to think about what to say when he went to the main hall. In addition, Su Wuming was talented and responsible. Although he was cold and devoted to the sword, he was extremely fair. He didn't know if Zhongshan would let him go. Even if he hid in the world and watched the world change. Baidu searched the novel website of Yunlai Pavilion to let you experience the latest and fastest novel chapters. All the novels were updated in seconds. Chapter 959. When Rinpoche came back again, he was wearing baggy pants, a t-shirt, and sunglasses. Zhongshan couldn't help but take a few more glances at this strange outfit. In addition, there were 2 more boxes in his hands. He casually opened the box in his right hand. Inside was a metal box similar to the one in the previous box. However, this time it was not 400,000 tons but 10,000 tons. The yield was not small, but it was detonated underground, so the gas produced by the explosion could not spread quickly. A large number of particles, photons, and rays, as well as the accompanying sound waves after tearing through the air, would also be reduced. It would affect the village, but there should not be too many casualties. Did the various hall masters return today? You can leave those who don't deserve to die outside, Rinpoche said. Zhongshan smiled bitterly at first. There were more than 40 people, and at least half of them didn't deserve to die. If these people were left outside, the people inside would be suspicious. After thinking about it for a while, he realized that it did not matter if they were suspicious. Even if 1 or 2 people came out, it would be fine as long as the Temple Master did not come out to check. Once the Temple Master of Heaven was dead, the rest would be easy to deal with. All right. Zhongshan nodded seriously. Then it's settled. Send me a signal. When the time comes, you'd better hide quickly. Rinpoche clapped his hands, looking relaxed. Pressing the detonation button was indeed an easy task. Mr. Rin has to go with me. Otherwise they will be suspicious. After all, the sub-temple masters have returned this time for Mr. Rin. Zhongshan smiled. Rinpoche's expression froze for a moment. If he were to go, he would at least have to reach the entrance of the shrine. This distance was already somewhat dangerous for him. After all, this was a direct confrontation with a nuclear bomb, and the power of this nuclear bomb was only a simple assessment. If anything went wrong, how far can you run in 3 breaths? Rinpoche suddenly asked. 300 zhang. 8,000 meters was enough. All right. When the time comes, you can run with me, Rinpoche said. Just like that, the 2 of them settled the matter. Then Zhongshan said hesitantly, Su Wuming used to work for the Temple of Heaven. Would Mr. Rin let him off? There was also Wen Shaoxing and the others. They can leave the Temple of Heaven and never appear again. Rinpoche looked at him. Fine, I'll give them this chance. In the future, no one should ever hear of their name, no one should ever see them. If I hear any more news about them, don't blame me for being ruthless. Thank you, Mr. Rin. Zhongshan cupped his hands and bowed. Subsequently, the 2 of them returned to the room. The sky was still dark and Zhongshan bade farewell. Mr. Rin, please rest first. I'll go look for the palace master in the morning. Everyone will gather in the evening to discuss the matter. After Zhongshan left, Rinpoche took out the radio station from another box, adjusted it to the corresponding frequency, and contacted the Empress in a short while. When are you coming back? Or I can bring you back. Even though the Empress's voice was cold, her concern could be heard. Rinpoche laughed upon hearing this. At least 2 to 3 days, at most 4 to 5 days. Everything is going well here. I think we'll be back soon. The Empress silently noted in her heart that she would beat Rinpoche up for another 6 to 4 hours after he came back in 2 to 3 days. If he came back in 4 to 5 days, she would beat him up for another 8 to 10 hours. If she exceeded this time limit, the additional time would double. A day later he would be beaten up for 4 more hours. Is it convenient to talk now? Sort of. Where are you? A region near the sea in Great Xia. I'm not sure of its exact location. They killed Wu Kai? Rinpoche was silent for a while before replying, yes. The Empress didn't ask what Rinpoche had promised them. She would talk about this when he came back. Anything she said now would only cause unnecessary changes to Rinpoche. Although the Empress didn't intend to forgive the murderer, she didn't want to cause any trouble for Rinpoche at this time and even put him in danger. I have stationed troops at the border and can go north at any time. You be more careful. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Rinpoche smiled brightly. He then chatted with the Empress for a while before turning off the radio station. The next morning, Zhongshan went to the Temple of Heaven and returned at noon with a metal box in his hand. Rinpoche opened it and saw that there was indeed a nuclear warhead inside. In this way, everything was ready except for the final push. She's a little suspicious, Zhongshan said. Will it affect her? Rinpoche turned to look at him. I don't think so. She won't leave the Temple of Heaven easily. Zhongshan shook his head. It doesn't matter then. Rinpoche handed him another box and said, just send this in the evening. Zhongshan nodded. It was finally over. Thousands of years of forbearance was finally coming to an end. The two sat facing each other for a while and Zhongshan couldn't help but ask, are the people living well in your place? They don't have to worry about food and clothing. Rinpoche replied faintly. Advanced productivity has brought about a large number of living supplies. Here, a person is considered a good laborer if he can farm 10 mu of land a year. Including the livestock, it's only 20 mu of land. In our place, a person and machinery can farm 300 mu of land. Not to mention the output, 1 mu of your land can only produce 200 to 300 caddies of grain, while 1 mu of our land can produce 1,000 caddies of grain. Some high-yielding crops can even produce 4,000 to 5,000 caddies of grain. We only need 1% of your labor to feed the same population or even more. Zhongshan sat for a long time before saying, it's really fascinating. There's no need to be fascinated. You can see it. Rinpoche laughed. Seeing Zhongshan's surprised expression, he added, you can see it in a few years in Dayo. There's no need to come to our place. Zhongshan thought about it and laughed as well. That's not bad. If that day comes, let's get drunk for a few months to calm our hearts. Although it was just a simple question, Rinpoche's impression of Zhongshan improved a lot. This was because as a spirit wheel expert and a high-ranking member of the Temple of Heaven, his first question was, are the people living well? Afterward, the two chatted, mostly with Zhongshan asking questions and Rinpoche answering them. Zhongshan was very interested in the world that Rinpoche talked about. Through Rinpoche's description, Zhongshan's mind also outlined a world where people had endless food, wore exquisite clothes, rode on automatic walking machines, ran on land, went deep into the sea and even soared in the sky. Countless hot-blooded men rode on their own ships, braved the wind and waves, and searched for the legendary One Piece. Every day, new information would be posted in League of Legends, such as which hero had discovered a new island, which hero had discovered a new route, which hero had discovered a new crop, which hero had charmed a few beautiful alien women. When the time was almost up, Zhongshan had to suppress his curiosity, send the box to the Temple of Heaven, and then come back to bring Rinpoche in there. What they had just talked about filled him with anticipation for the future. Perhaps one day he would be able to see that scene. After Zhongshan left, Rinpoche spread his hands. Why was this guy so interested in the League of Legends and One Piece? If he continued, it would be a battle between the League of Legends and the 7 warlords of the sea. Rinpoche got up, shook the wrinkles on his clothes, put his sunglasses back on his face, opened the window, and saw an extremely exquisite courtyard. After admiring it for a while, Zhongshan appeared in the courtyard. With a smile on his face, he said, Mr. Rin, the things have been delivered. Let's go and send them on their way. Rinpoche looked relaxed. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 960. Rinpoche sat on a rock in front of the Sea God Temple. Not far in front of him was Zhongshan, looking in the direction of the temple with a gentle smile on his face. He had just witnessed a branch hall master enter the divine temple. A gust of wind blew past, and a malnourished, skinny man with dry hair and an abnormally pale face appeared in front of Rinpoche and Zhongshan. His body was wrapped tightly in a large black coat. Deputy Palace Master, why don't you go in? The man asked with a smile. So it's Bohai. You can accompany me here to wait for a few people. Zhongshan immediately smiled. I'm fine with it. Bohai turned to look at Rinpoche and asked softly, "What are you trying to do?" "You'll know soon." Zhongshan smiled and changed the topic. Bohai furrowed his brows and shook his head slightly. "You know my body's condition. I caught a cold on the way here. Let's go in and rest a bit." After saying that, he cupped his hands at Zhongshan. Zhongshan's expression darkened and he stopped talking. He turned around and watched Bohai enter the sea god temple, his eyes filled with regret. She wanted to help him, but it was a pity. Rinpoche watched everything coldly from the sidelines with a sneer on his face. This was really like the king of hell telling you to die at midnight, but who would be able to keep you alive until midnight? However, Zhongshan didn't ask them to stay after the rejection, which made Rinpoche very satisfied. Zhongshan was very wise to save those that he could and give up on those that he couldn't. The scariest thing these days was to have a lousy teammate. If that was the case, he might as well just leave and blow everyone up. Rinpoche watched coldly from the sidelines as the people came one by one. Some people began to stay by Zhongshan's side. Although they were puzzled, they still waited for Zhongshan's explanation. In the evening, in addition to Zhongshan and Rinpoche, there were 13 other people waiting outside the sea god temple. This included Su Wuming and Wen Shaoxing. To be honest, Rinpoche hoped that the two of them would go in so that he could blow them up and make the Empress happy. It could only be said that these two people were not fated to die. "It's time," Rinpoche said faintly as he got up from the rock and stretched. "Vice Palace Master, what's going on?" The one who spoke was a graceful woman in black with a veil over her face. This person was the Fushi Palace Master, Fei Yan. "I have a few words to say to everyone." Zhongshan turned around and said to everyone. Everyone's eyes narrowed as they knew that the show was about to begin. They had all seen how Zhongshan had been testing the Temple Lord all these years. These people were either trying to persuade Zhongshan to reconsider or simply standing on his side, which was why they were here. He didn't know what Zhongshan was going to say. They wouldn't want to start an internal strife, right? Zhongshan wouldn't be so unwise. While everyone was pondering, they saw Zhongshan carrying Rinpoche and speeding away. "Everyone, please take a step forward." "Hall Master Zhong, what are you trying to do?" A figure appeared in front of the celestial temple and shouted, "Qingyang." Zhongshan ignored him and didn't stop. Everyone hesitated for a moment. A few of them gave Qingyang a look before catching up to him. Qingyang's face was filled with anger and resentment. What was this Zhongshan trying to do at this moment? In the main hall, the Temple Lord's face was gloomy and his eyes flickered. What exactly was Zhongshan trying to do? He shouldn't have been kept alive all these years. The others either closed their eyes and remained silent, or their eyes flickered. Some people thought that Zhongshan was stopping the others outside and wondered if he was going to break ties with the Temple Lord. Some people were also thinking about Rinpoche, but unfortunately, there was no way to make him give in. What exactly did the Temple Lord want? Just as everyone was having all kinds of thoughts and Qingyang was hesitating whether to catch up, Rinpoche pressed the button in his hand with a relaxed smile. At that moment, everyone felt a great sense of danger coming from under their feet. Their hair stood on end as they immediately ran forward with all their might. A loud, dull sound was heard almost at the same time as the ground shook. Almost instantly, the sea god temple disappeared. It was replaced by a pillar of fire that soared into the sky, mixed with broken bricks and stones. The ground was shaking and swaying as if an earth dragon was rolling under their feet. Cracks appeared on the ground as the flames surged underground, looking for a vent, and erupted with mud and gravel. With a loud sound, holes appeared one after another on the ground, and flames rose into the sky. A large amount of soil burned and turned into a rain of fire in the air. When they turned around and looked behind them, they saw that the world had completely changed. The sky was reflected in a fiery red, and the ground was like a nation of fire. Countless cracks and flames were spread all over it, and they were still increasing without any signs of abating. The shaking under their feet didn't stop, and noises, screams, and the sound of houses collapsing could be heard from the nearby fishing village. What the hell is happening? Everyone turned to look in that direction. The ground and air within a radius of more than a kilometer were filled with pillars of fire, flames, and scorched earth. Accompanied by continuous collapses and explosions, it was like purgatory. In particular, the original location of the sea god temple had become a nation of fire. Grayish-white smoke and all kinds of dust gradually formed a mushroom-like cloud in the sky along with the flames. Everyone looked ahead in horror. Rinpoche, who was wearing sunglasses, felt a little regretful that the explosion had been detonated underground. The scene seemed to be much smaller and less artistic. However, for these people, this artistic scene was already shocking beyond their expectations. He could feel that Zhongshang's body had completely stiffened. Even Zhongshang, one of the initiators, didn't expect the momentum to be so terrifying. This was coming from underground, and the Temple of Heaven was dozens of meters underground. If it was like this on the surface, then the people underground probably wouldn't even have their bones left. Zhongshang, what did you do? Su Wuming turned his head to look at Zhongshang and Rinpochen with a murderous look in his eyes. It seemed like he could draw his sword at any time. Everyone else also had a horrified look on their faces. The chief of the Temple of Heaven isn't a human but a foreigner. For thousands of years, the Temple of Heaven has been influenced by foreigners and has become a weapon in their hands. Zhongshang said bluntly. What did you say? Everyone was stunned. Even the scorched earth in front of them didn't shock them as much as this sentence. Nonsense. Nonsense. Zhongshang, you colluded with outsiders to rebel and even killed the hall chiefs. You are a sinner of the Temple of Heaven. A sharp shout came from not far away. Qin Yang's body was covered in scorch marks, and his face was covered in dirt. His eyes were flickering. Don't you know whether she's a foreigner or not? Do you really think that no one knows what happened 3,000 years ago? Zhongshang sneered. Nonsense. Qin Yang rebuked, and his eyes flickered even faster. I'll let you know and make you die convinced. The evidence that the chief of the Temple of Heaven is a foreigner has always been in my hands. Everyone follow me. Zhongshang said to the crowd. Humph, I want to see what evidence you have. You clearly colluded with outsiders to rebel and still tried to deceive us. Zhongshang, you will die a horrible death. Qin Yang scolded. We will soon find out who will die. Zhongshang turned to look at him and sneered. Then he led the way to the fishing village. At this time, nearly half of the fishing village had collapsed. Fortunately, the fishing village was made of wooden houses, and it was a distance away from the sea god temple. Thus there were not many casualties. However, people were still panicking. Many powerful people appeared outside the village and looked at the area shrouded in flames with panic on their faces. When they saw Zhongshang and the others coming over, they calmed down and quickly asked, Sirs, what happened? Go back first and do what you need to do. Don't panic. We will summon you later. Zhongshang waved his hand and asked everyone to retreat. Qin Yang. Su Wuming suddenly shouted. Everyone turned their heads and saw that Qin Yang, who had been following behind them and getting further and further away, had actually turned around and ran away. After a few flashes they could no longer see him. He didn't even dare to confront Zhongshang. Now that everyone knew what was going on, they immediately believed Zhongshang's words. Everyone was shocked and angry. They didn't expect the chief of the temple to be a foreigner. They didn't expect Qin Yang's branch to have known about it thousands of years ago. However, he had been hiding it for thousands of years because he was a foreigner. Su Wuming's face turned green and red. He shouted angrily and rushed straight into the sky. In just a moment, everyone felt a majestic sword intent coming from afar. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 961. After a while, Su Wuming returned with Qin Yang, who was covered in blood. Su Wuming's face was also livid. Qin Yang's reaction just now had already explained everything. However, he still wanted to see the evidence. With a silent atmosphere, everyone followed Zhongshang to the secret room in the mansion. At a glance they saw the portraits on the wall. Unlike Rinpochen, they could tell at a glance that these portraits were similar to the chief of the Temple of Heaven. These are the previous chiefs of that branch. Zhongshang said faintly. Why is this happening? Someone asked subconsciously. No matter what they looked like when they were young, they actually looked so similar when they were old. Zhongshang silently pressed a few times on the wall, and 2 stone slabs on the ground directly flipped up, revealing a coffin below. You will know after seeing this. Zhongshang took out the coffin as he spoke, revealing a dried corpse inside. It wasn't rotten, but it was almost completely dehydrated, and its appearance couldn't be seen. This is the chief of the Temple of Heaven from 3,300 years ago, Zhongshang said without waiting for anyone to ask. 3,300 years ago? The chief of the Temple of Heaven? Everyone was shocked. How could the corpse of the chief of the Temple of Heaven from 3,300 years ago be here? When Shaoxing suddenly said from behind the crowd, 3,300 years ago, the chief of the Temple of Heaven, Qing Lan, had a fierce battle with Fui Dao, Jian Wuming, and Gong Yang Pinji. The three of them died and she was seriously injured. On her way back to the Temple of Heaven, she accepted a disciple and died after explaining some matters. Her disciple, Qin Kong, later became the 21st chief of the Faidu Temple. Zhongshang nodded slightly. As expected of Wen Shaoxing, he was famous for his encyclopedic knowledge. Not bad. Back then, Qing Lan accepted a disciple, but in fact this disciple was already prepared. For them, the human body is a vessel that can be abandoned and manipulated at any time. Originally, this body should have been destroyed, but Qing Lan needed some time to adapt to the new body after she had just changed her body. My ancestor found an opportunity to steal this body. You mean, our bodies are their vessels? Someone asked subconsciously. That's right. As he spoke, Zhongshang turned the body over, and everyone found that the back of the head was completely open, with some shrunken greenish-gray matter inside. The original brain tissue is almost gone, replaced by this substance. In order to confirm this, the patriarch specially stole a few corpses and opened them to compare, said Zhongshang. In fact, even if they didn't steal corpses for comparison, it wasn't the first time these people had beaten people's brains out. What about the internal organs? Ren Baqin frowned and suddenly asked. The internal organs are still there, just like a human, Zhongshang said. What does Mr. Ren know? It's somewhat similar to a creature that I've seen before. However, that creature is a parasite that lives in the chest cavity. It uses its body as a substitute for the internal organs and controls the body. Although it can move, it doesn't have any reaction to the outside world, Rinpoche said. The corpse reminded him of the herdsman and the jade-waisted slaves. Before the jade-waisted slaves transformed into butterflies, this was how they parasitized humans. He wondered if this alien race was related to the herders. After all, the herdsman had always been monitoring the human race. If this alien race had some kind of connection with the herdsman, then they had to be more careful. Hearing this, everyone's expressions turned ugly and they remained silent. Zhongshang's words were very credible. Although they couldn't prove that this corpse belonged to the former chief of the Temple of Heaven. Coupled with Qin Yang's reaction at that time, everyone couldn't even question him. With a sullen face, Su Wuming flicked his finger at Qin Yang, who was lying on the ground. After a while, Qin Yang's body moved and he woke up. What else do you have to say, Qin Yang? Su Wuming asked coldly. What Zhongshang said is false. He lied to you. Qin Yang, who had just woken up, didn't know what had happened. His first reaction was to insist that Zhongshang's words were false. Then why did you run? Someone sneered. At this time, everyone hated Qin Yang to the core. They didn't expect that the chief of the Temple of Heaven was a foreign race and that Qin Yang's branch had been following the chief's lead despite knowing about it. If it weren't for Zhongshang, everyone would still be in the dark. Qin Yang still wanted to quibble at this time? Qin Yang's face was ferocious as he suddenly shouted, Zhongshang is rebelling against his superiors and you are all accomplices. You will all die a horrible death. Is Qin Chen's branch a foreign race? Su Wuming asked coldly, looking at him as if he was looking at a dead man. No. Qin Yang suddenly yelled. You know that no one can lie in front of me. It was a woman, Fei Yen, who spoke. Qin Yang looked at Fei Yen, then at Su Wuming and Zhongshang, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. You will regret this. Su Wuming flicked his finger in the air, and Qin Yang's head flew off as blood spurted out. I'm going to the Temple of Heaven to take a look, Su Wuming said to Zhongshang. Then he looked at Rinpoche and said, when I come back, I will give you an explanation. After speaking, Su Wuming turned and disappeared at the entrance of the secret room. A few others left one after another and followed Su Wuming. Zhongshang said to the remaining people, this is Mr. Ren. You came back this time because of him. Everyone nodded at Rinpoche. In fact, they already knew about Rinpoche. Even if they hadn't seen him before as the chief of a temple, they had their own sources of information. Everyone please wait here. I still have to go and appease the village. When everyone returned to the room above, Rinpoche kicked a box on the ground and said, there are some things inside. Give them to those people. Now that there is fire poison underground, they will either die or become disabled if they come into contact with it. These things can weaken the poison. It doesn't matter if Su Wuming is dead, but there is still value in saving the others. When everyone heard this, they suddenly realized a problem. Could it be that he was the one who created that purgatory scene just now? It was unexpected, but it was also reasonable. Zhongshang didn't have such means. After Zhongshang left, everyone began to calm down from the shock brought by the shocking news that the chief of the Temple of Heaven was actually a foreigner. Some people also began to look at Ren Baqin curiously. They said that Mr. Ren is from the outside world? A man who looked like a gigolo asked. He indeed looked like a gigolo with sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, red lips and white teeth. He looked to be in his 20s. However, Ren Baqin guessed that his age wasn't like his appearance. Ren Baqin nodded slightly. Upon hearing his answer, everyone shifted their attention to Ren Baqin. After all, they still had to wait for Su Wuming to return. On the contrary, Ren Baqin, an outsider who was right in front of them, made them full of curiosity. Next, Ren Baqin began to helplessly answer everyone's questions. He repeated the rise of another branch of the human race, the chaotic star sea, the power struggle between the three races, the Summoner's Canyon, and Snow White and the seven Calabash brothers. It wasn't until dawn that Zhongshang returned, feeling slightly exhausted. It settled down for the time being. I didn't say anything about Qing Chen's branch being a foreigner. Everyone nodded. This kind of thing really had to be kept a secret. Go back and appease the people from your own branches, Zhongshang said. He wasn't willing to say anything else. After all, the chief of the Temple of Heaven, many of the sub-temple chiefs and venerables had died, but they were safe and sound. It took him a lot of effort to suppress this matter. It was another noon before Su Wuming and the others returned. 2 broken crystal coffins were also brought back with them. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers mobile. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.